This story is about how our own body knows us more deeply than we know it. And every fact is like a hint that we haven't noticed. Fact 1. At first glance, it might seem that the heart works rhythmically and predictably, like a metronome. However, if a person is connected to a sensitive cardiac monitor and the intervals between beats are carefully studied, a curious finding emerges. They are never equal. A variation of tens of milliseconds is not a malfunction, but a built-in adaptation mechanism. Heart rate variability, as this phenomenon is called, is a precise indicator of the body's condition. High variability signifies good fitness, stress resilience, and proper regulation of the autonomic nervous system. Low variability, conversely, points to fatigue, illness, or chronic stress. Interestingly, newborns have a much higher rate of this indicator than the elderly. Athletes use it for fine-tuning their training, and medical professionals use it for risk assessment. In the 2020s, watches and bracelets began to appear that record variability in real time. It turns out the heart doesn't just pump blood. It engages in a dialogue with the nervous system, breathing, hormones, and even mood, registering every disruption in this conversation before we even realize we're getting sick. Fact 2. An adult human body has about 206 bones, but this number is not constant. It can change with age, lifestyle, and even unexpected mutations. To begin with, a newborn has almost 100 more bones, around 300. Some of them fuse over time. For example, several skull bones form a single cap, and the triple pelvic structure joins into one strong arch. However, there are also reverse cases. In 2019, anatomists from Flinders University in Australia discovered that one bone, considered lost during evolution, the fibula, a tiny bone in the tendon behind the knee, has started to appear more frequently in people. At the end of the 19th century, it was recorded in 1 out of 10 people, and today in almost 40%. The reasons are still only hypothesized. Perhaps it is due to changes in diet, weight gain, and joint stress. Moreover, in some cases, a person may have extra ribs, additional vertebrae, or even 2 atlases, the first cervical vertebrae. This is not necessarily a disease. Most people with such features have no complaints. It turns out that even the skeleton is not a template, but a mobile architectural project that can change from generation to generation. Fact 3. If the brain could write memoirs, they would begin with silent currents, electrical activity that arises even in the womb. The first recorded impulses in an embryo appear at the 6th week of pregnancy. However, the real drama begins after birth. During the first year of life, the brain nearly doubles in size, not due to neuron growth, but due to the formation of connections between them. Every second, 200 to 1,000 new synapses, connections between nerve cells, are formed. There are so many that by the age of 3, a child has nearly twice as many as they will have as an adult. The brain is literally ready for anything, any language, culture, or movement. But if these potentials are not used, they are erased. A process known as synaptic pruning begins, the elimination of weak or unnecessary connections. This is not degradation, but fine-tuning. By adolescence, the brain no longer grows wider, but becomes sharpened. Excess is removed, and what is needed is strengthened. Everything participates in this selection: experience, environment, stress, love, fear. How we speak, move, solve problems, or recognize faces is the result of our brain once deciding in childhood to keep a particular neural network rather than another. Fact 4. Outwardly, skin appears to be a mere covering, but in reality, it is the body's heaviest and most complex system. The average weight of adult human skin is around 5 kilograms, exceeding the combined weight of the liver and kidneys. It is divided into 3 layers, each representing a distinct world. The innermost layer, the hypodermis, stores fat and cushions impacts. The middle layer, the dermis, contains millions of nerve endings, blood vessels, and hair follicles. The outermost layer, the epidermis, completely renews itself every month. However, the most astonishing aspect of skin is its reactivity. It can read stress by changing temperature, releasing more sweat, and becoming more sensitive. Studies have shown that in people who are praised or touched with good intentions, the skin temporarily increases its conductivity. It listens to emotions and responds to them. In 2022, a group of neurophysiologists from Cambridge established that skin can remember short-term exposures as if possessing rudimentary sensory memory. Furthermore, it produces hormones such as serotonin and vitamin D, transforming from a barrier into an active participant in metabolism. Thus, skin is not just a shield, but an intelligent, communicative tissue that is the first to know when something has changed within us. Fact 5. The liver is the only internal human organ that can regrow. This is not a metaphor. If up to 2/3 of its tissue is lost, it initiates a regeneration process, and within a few months, it almost completely restores its mass and function. Importantly, this is not a simple enlargement of the remaining cells, but a full formation of new tissue with vessels and structure. This is precisely why a donor can give a part of their liver to another person, and after 6 months, both individuals will have an organ that is almost as it was before. This ability is linked to the liver's critical role. It filters toxins, participates in protein synthesis, stores vitamins, regulates blood sugar levels, and even neutralizes hormones. It processes over 1.5 liters of blood per day. Regeneration begins with the rapid activation of dormant genes. Signaling molecules in the blood literally wake up hepatocytes, liver cells, and they begin to divide. Interestingly, the process is not chaotic. It starts closer to the site of loss, and then the wave moves inward. However, even the liver has its limits. With chronic poisoning, for example, from alcohol or viruses, the tissue is replaced by scars, and then the regeneration process is blocked. This is where the organ's greatness and vulnerability lie, as it works around the clock, almost without rest. Fact 6. Inside bones lies one of the body's most mysterious factories, red bone marrow. It's not a brain in the usual sense, but a spongy tissue where millions of blood cells are born every second. From a single stem cell, an erythrocyte, a platelet, or a lymphocyte can emerge here depending on what the body needs. But this process has a strict hierarchy: precursor cells, signaling proteins, conductor molecules. The bone marrow seems to know on its own that a person has a cut and initiates accelerated platelet production. Or it senses the onset of an infection and increases leukocyte output. Essentially, it's the largest organ of the immune and hematopoietic systems. In infants, all bone marrow is active. In adults, only the marrow in the ribs, sternum, vertebrae, and pelvic bones remain active. The rest transforms into yellow marrow, a fatty layer. In emergencies, it can also turn red again. The body deploys reserve production. Doctors have long learned to collect bone marrow stem cells for transplantation, but they still don't know precisely how the marrow determines when and what to produce. It's a system with internal intelligence, but without nerves. It's controlled not by will, but by an internal logic of survival. Fact 7. We rarely consider how many times we blink per day. Meanwhile, it's around 15,000. Each blink lasts about 0.3 of a second. Over a day, this amounts to nearly an hour and a half of blindness, which the brain prefers not to report to consciousness. But why blink so often? It's not solely for eye lubrication. Blinking is a rhythm that the visual system follows. Studies have shown that during blinking, the brain reboots visual areas, discarding excess information and clearing noise. This is particularly important when changing focus, from near to far, from bright to dim. Blinking is like a semicolon in a visual sentence. For actors delivering monologues, it slows down. For those who lie, it speeds up. And with certain neurological disorders, blinking almost disappears, causing a person to perceive environmental changes less. In 2021, neurophysiologists from Japan published a study demonstrating that blinking activates the same brain areas as brief rest. Thus, each blink is not only corneal protection, but also a micropause for the entire nervous system. Our sight is not a continuous stream, but an assembly of thousands of short scenes. Fact 8. Human hearing is structured not like a microphone, but as an event analyzer. The ear perceives not only sound, but also its source, direction, intensity, rhythm, and even the probability of danger. It all begins with a tiny eardrum, a membrane a tenth of a millimeter thick. It vibrates under air pressure and transmits movement to tiny bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes. The stapes, the smallest bone in the body, is about 3 millimeters long. It pushes fluid inside the cochlea, the spiral-shaped part of the inner ear, where vibrations are converted into nerve impulses. But the magic happens in the brain. It completes the sound, highlights what is important, suppresses what is unnecessary, and recognizes the familiar. This is why we can hear our name through noise, or understand speech in another language if we are familiar with its rhythm. Hearing is one of the fastest analyzers. Less than 100 milliseconds pass from sound to reaction. Furthermore, the ear is a vestibular center. Inside it are 3 semicircular canals filled with fluid, which inform the brain about our position. Hearing impairment can disrupt gait, and changes in ear pressure can cause nausea. Consequently, the ear is not just a sound receiver, but a navigation station, a security system, and a noise editor all in one. Ninth fact: saliva is one of the most undervalued bodily fluids. We take it for granted, not realizing that without it, eating, speaking, or even maintaining healthy tooth enamel would be impossible. A person produces between 1.5 to 2 liters of saliva daily, and its composition changes constantly based on smells, tastes, and emotional state. It contains dozens of enzymes, including alpha amylase, which begins starch breakdown right in the mouth. Its concentration significantly increases when anticipating food or even thinking about it. However, there are more subtle aspects. Saliva contains antimicrobial proteins like lysozyme, lactoferrin, and peroxidase, which neutralize hundreds of thousands of microbes daily. A single drop of saliva can hold up to 1 million bacteria, but the vast majority are not harmful. Instead, they help maintain the mouth's flora. Furthermore, saliva plays a role in regeneration. In animals, it aids wound healing, and in humans, it also helps the mucous membrane. Recent studies have shown that traces of dozens of diseases, from diabetes to cancer, can be detected in saliva, suggesting it might replace blood in some future analyses. Thus, every spit is a chemical telegram conveying information about the body's condition. Fact 10. A human body has between 2 and 5 million sweat glands, more than hair. They're located in various places, with the densest concentrations on the palms, soles, and forehead. Sweat is not just water and salt, but a complex mixture containing amino acids, lactic acid, hormones, and sometimes traces of medications or drugs. Its primary function is cooling, not detoxification, which is minimal. When body temperature rises, the hypothalamus, the thermoregulation center, signals the glands. They release fluid onto the skin, and its evaporation removes excess heat. This is especially important in heat or during physical exertion. Interestingly, trained individuals sweat earlier and more actively as their bodies learn to shed heat faster. There are 2 types of glands: eccrine, found almost all over the body, and apocrine, located in the armpits, groin, and around the nipples. The latter are active during stress and secrete a fattier odoriferous fluid that feeds odor-causing bacteria. Sweating also serves as a form of communication. In 2014, a research group from Utrecht found that sweat from a person experiencing fear affects the facial expressions of others, causing them to tense muscles and mimic anxiety. Therefore, sweat is not only about temperature, but also about nonverbal body language. Fact 11. The nose is not merely a pipe for air. It functions as a complete biochemical laboratory, a navigation center, and a protective filter. Air passing through the nasal passages encounters turbulence, bony projections that swirl the flow, directing it in a spiral. This provides time for analysis and preparation. The air is warmed, cleared of dust, and humidified. The mucous membrane lining the nose contains millions of microscopic hairs and a layer of mucus only hundreds of a millimeter thick. It is here that bacteria, viruses, and dirt particles settle. Most importantly, however, is the sense of smell. Olfactory receptors are located high up, near the base of the skull, and through them there is a direct connection to the brain's limbic system, the center for emotions and memory. This is why scents evoke such vivid memories. The same aroma can trigger feelings of childhood, anxiety, or love, depending on the context. The nose also contains neurons sensitive to pheromones and other chemical signals, although these are less pronounced in humans than in animals. Nevertheless, they are sufficient for an intuitive sense of friend or foe. Furthermore, the nose regulates voice resonance. When the nose is blocked, the voice sounds different. Consequently, the nose is not just a guardian of respiration, but a subtle mediator between the body and the external world. Fact 12. Digestion begins long before the stomach, and even before swallowing. As soon as a person sees food or thinks about it, the brain triggers a cascade of signals. Salivary glands activate, the stomach starts to secrete acid, and the pancreas prepares enzymes. This is the conditioned reflex phase of digestion, discovered by Ivan Pavlov in the 19th century. But the second phase is already mechanics. Swallowing is a complex, strictly coordinated process. Over 30 muscles work synchronously to move food through the pharynx into the esophagus, bypassing the trachea. In the esophagus, food is propelled by peristalsis, rhythmic contractions that literally push food down, even if a person eats lying down. In the stomach, protein breakdown begins. Hydrochloric acid and the enzyme pepsin turn the dense mass into chyme, a semi-liquid gruel. After 2 to 3 hours, it enters the small intestine, where pancreatic enzymes and bile come into play. Absorption also begins here. The intestinal walls have villi and microvilli, which increase the surface area to the size of a tennis court. This is the center of exchange. Through the intestine, the body receives energy, building materials, and vitamins. And if something goes wrong, everything suffers. Digestion is not just eat and digest, but a complex symphony where the slightest failure of one instrument changes the entire melody. Fact 13. Muscles are not solely about strength. They are a versatile system for movement, heat, metabolism, and even hormonal response. The human body has over 600 muscles, and almost every one is multifunctional. The largest is the gluteal muscle. The fastest is responsible for blinking, and the most enduring is the heart muscle. Crucially, it is their interaction. Even a simple act like raising an arm requires the coordinated work of dozens of muscles. Some contract, others relax, and still others stabilize. Inside a muscle fiber are thousands of myofibrils made of actin and myosin filaments. These slide past each other like zipper teeth, creating contraction. But nothing happens without an electrical impulse. A nerve transmits a signal and the muscle responds. This connection is so fast that an athlete can react to a starting sound in fractions of a second. During training, a muscle doesn't just grow larger, it increases its number of nuclei, develops capillaries, and enhances receptor sensitivity. Muscles are also an endocrine organ. During exertion, they release myokines, proteins that affect immunity, mood, and even the growth of new neurons. Therefore, physical activity is not just a way to burn calories, but also a form of molecular communication. Every movement is not just an effort, but a message to the body. I am alive, I am ready. Fact 14. The eyes are the only part of the brain that is extended outward. Their structure is almost a miracle of engineering. The iris, which regulates the flow of light, resembles a camera's diaphragm. The pupil is not an opening, but a dynamic filter. In bright light, it narrows to 1 millimeter, and in darkness, it expands to 8 millimeters. The lens is a living lens that changes shape on command from the ciliary muscles. But the most important part is the retina. It is a thin film at the back of the eye, containing about 130 million photoreceptors, cones and rods. Cones are responsible for color vision and light, while rods are responsible for black and white vision in twilight. What is surprising is that on 1 square millimeter of the macula, the center of vision, the density of cones is higher than in the best sensors. Every photon that enters the eye triggers a cascade of chemical reactions that ultimately turn into an electrical impulse. But the brain does not just receive a picture. It compiles, interprets, and supplements it. This is why a person sees a whole scene, even though in reality, the eye constantly moves and jerks, and part of the visual field is blind due to the exit of the optic nerve. Also, the retina is a mirror of health. Diabetes, hypertension, and tumors can be diagnosed from it. This is because it is the only place in the body where blood vessels can be seen directly without surgery. The eye is not a window to the world. It is a screen, an editor, and a mirror of the body all at once. Fact 15. While skin reacts to cold and the brain to pain, hair responds to emotions. Hair itself is dead tissue, but its root, the follicle, is alive, complex, and sensitive to hormones, stress, and even light. An adult has about 5 million hair follicles, each functioning like a mini factory. On the head, there are approximately 100,000. Hair grows in phases. Anagen is active growth, catagen is transition, and telogen is rest. This cyclical nature causes the effect of hair loss. At any given moment, about 10% of head hair is in the resting phase. Stress, illness, or diets can sharply increase this percentage, leading to seasonal shedding. But most striking is the reaction to emotions. Goosebumps and hair standing on end result from the contraction of a small muscle, the erector pili, attached to the follicle. This is an ancient reflex inherited from ancestors. In animals, it thickens fur during threat or cold. In humans, it remains as an echo. Hair stands up from fear, excitement, or music. Hair also serves as an archive. Its structure can reveal what hormones and toxins a person received in recent months. Studies on pilots, athletes, and prisoners have shown that cortisol levels, the stress hormone, are precisely recorded in hair like tree rings. The silent strands on our head are a chronicle of emotions, nutrition, and environment. Fact 16. The immune system is not a single organ, but a dispersed army with memory, a set of rules, and internal intelligence. Millions of cells circulate in the blood and tissues, each specializing in its own function. Lymphocytes, macrophages, dendritic cells, neutrophils, each has its own task: to recognize, destroy, remember, and transmit signals. But the most important thing is accuracy. The body must distinguish its own from foreign. If the system malfunctions, either an autoimmune disease occurs where the body attacks itself, or cancer when it fails to recognize danger. Lymphocytes are trained in special organs: B lymphocytes in the bone marrow and T lymphocytes in the thymus. This organ is particularly important in childhood, but atrophies with age. Scientists first understood its significance in the 1960s, when the removal of the thymus in mice led to a complete immune collapse. Another important element is the lymphatic system. It collects excess fluid from tissues, filters it in the lymph nodes, and returns it to the bloodstream. It is in the lymph nodes that antigens and defender cells meet. And the immune system's memory is not an abstraction. After encountering a virus, B lymphocytes store information about it for years, so that upon reinvasion, they react instantly. This is how vaccinations work. Immunity is not armor, but an early warning and rapid response network. Molecular intelligence with lifelong memory. Fact 17. The human intestine is longer than it appears. Its total length is about 7 meters, with almost 6 meters being the small intestine. It is not just a tube, but a living, sensitive, autonomous system. It has its own nervous network, the so-called enteric brain, comprising up to 500 million neurons. This is more than in the spinal cord. It is this system that coordinates wall contractions, enzyme secretion, and interaction with microbes. Crucially, it does this independently. The intestine can contract and digest even in an unconscious person. It can learn after surgeries, diets, or changes in microflora. The most noticeable signals we feel are rumbling, spasms, hunger, and sometimes butterflies in the stomach. All these are reflections of the enteric nervous system's work. It is directly connected to the brain via the vagus nerve, and scientists increasingly speak of the gut-brain axis. Emotions affect digestion, and the state of the gut affects mood. A study in 2013 at UCLA showed that after a course of probiotics, participants improved their emotional perception, and their brain activity changed in areas responsible for stress. Thus, the intestine is not just an organ for absorption, but a full participant in the psychophysiological orchestra. It is the second brain, but with primary consequences. Fact 18. Blood is more than just a liquid. It's a transport system, an immune service, a cooling system, and an emergency mechanism all in one. An adult human body contains about 5 liters of blood. Half of this is plasma, water with proteins, glucose, hormones, and salts. The rest consist of cells. These include red blood cells, which carry oxygen, white blood cells, the guardians of immunity, and platelets, the repair crew for blood vessels. Red blood cells are the most numerous, up to 5 million in 1 cubic millimeter. They lack a nucleus, allowing them to bend and squeeze through capillaries with diameters of 2 to 3 micrometers. These cells live for about 4 months, after which they are broken down in the liver and spleen. Every day, the bone marrow produces around 200 billion new ones. White blood cells are less common, but live longer and have different functions. Platelets, on the other hand, live for only a week, during which time they patrol the vessels. When damage occurs, they instantly adhere to the wound edge, activate a cascade of proteins, and form a clot. Blood also regulates temperature. By transferring heat from muscles to the skin, it cools the body. It also carries hormones, metabolic byproducts, and inflammation signals. If an infection starts somewhere in the body, blood immediately transports markers and initiates a response. It is not merely a river of life, as the ancients called it. It is a mobile, fast, self-regulating biofleet, where each element knows its route and task. Fact 19th. Sleep is not an off switch. It is a mode change, a repair session, and, in many ways, a personality reboot. On average, a person sleeps a third of their life, about 25 years. During this time, processes occur that cannot be initiated while awake. Sleep is divided into phases: slow wave and rapid eye movement, REM. In slow wave sleep, the body recovers. Temperature drops, breathing slows, growth hormones are activated, and the brain is cleared. In 2012, a study in Rochester found that at night, the brain activates the glymphatic system, a network of channels that flush out metabolic waste, including toxic proteins linked to neurodegenerative diseases. This process does not start without sleep. REM sleep is the dream zone. During this phase, almost the entire brain is active, but the body is paralyzed, so we don't move in our sleep. Memory is consolidated, neural connections are strengthened, and events are processed in this phase. A reduction in this phase, for example, due to chronic sleep deprivation, leads to impaired emotional regulation and creative thinking. Also, during sleep, reactions are rehearsed. The brain plays out important moments, potential threats, and future scenarios. Therefore, sleep is not rest. It is a nocturnal laboratory where the brain tests reality, fixes damage, and rewrites its own script. Fact 20. Fingers are the pinnacle of motor skills. No other species possesses such precision, speed, and variety of movements. Each finger has 3 phalanges, as well as ligaments, tendons, nerves, and blood vessels. However, there are no muscles within the fingers themselves. They originate in the forearm, and finger movements are controlled by long tendon threads. This design provides lightness and maneuverability. The thumb is special. Its opposition to the other fingers is key to grasping, writing, and playing instruments. Each finger is connected to a separate brain zone. The sensory motor cortex has a map of the body, and the fingers occupy a disproportionately large area on it. For pianists and seamstresses, these zones are even wider, as the brain allocates space according to what is being trained. The tactile receptors on the fingertips are among the most sensitive in the body. They can distinguish relief to within 1/10 of a millimeter. But fingers are not just about touch and movement. They are involved in language, from counting to gesturing. For deaf people, they are the basis of speech. They also store the body's handwriting. The movement of fingers can determine a person's identity with up to 90% accuracy. It turns out that each finger is not just bone and skin. It is a concentrate of memory, coordination, language, and precision. An evolutionary tool that has literally allowed us to take the world into our hands. Fact 21. Body temperature is a measure that reflects a delicate balance system. A person's internal temperature is around 36 and 6/10 degrees Celsius. However, this is an average. Throughout the day, temperature fluctuates by a whole degree. Lower in the morning, higher in the evening. For women, there is a specific curve depending on the phases of their cycle. During sleep, the body cools down, and during stress, it heats up. This is managed by the hypothalamus, a brain region the size of a cherry but with immense influence. It receives signals from thermoreceptors in the skin, internal organs, and even blood. If the temperature drops, shivering kicks in, blood vessels constrict, and the skin becomes pale. If it rises, the opposite occurs. Vessels widen and sweating begins. These are not reactions to the external environment, but attempts to maintain internal stability. Even a change of 1.5 degrees can affect enzymatic reactions, brain function, and metabolism. Fever is also part of regulation. During infection, the body consciously raises its temperature to slow down microbe reproduction. In cases of heat stroke or hypothermia, the mechanisms begin to fail, and then every degree can become critical. Temperature is not just a number on a thermometer. It is a language through which the body communicates its equilibrium or its loss. Fact 22. A voice is simultaneously a personal imprint, a musical instrument, and a signaling system. It originates not in the mouth, but in the larynx, where 2 vocal folds, thin muscular plates, vibrate under the pressure of air. The frequency of their oscillations, ranging from 80 to 1000 Hz, determines the pitch of the sound. Men typically have longer and thicker folds, resulting in a lower voice. Women have shorter and thinner ones. Children have short and weak folds, leading to a high and resonant timbre. However, vibration itself is not yet a voice. The sound is modified in the resonators, the pharynx, nasal cavity, oral cavity, and sinuses. The position of the tongue, lips, and jaw all affect timbre, volume, and intonation. The control center is in the brain. Broca's area is responsible for constructing phrases, Wernicke's area for comprehension, and the motor cortex for movements. Remarkably, a voice changes not only with age or illness, but also with mood. During anxiety, it becomes higher. With fatigue, it becomes duller. And with joy, it becomes richer in overtones. Furthermore, a voice reflects the state of respiration, hormonal background, and even glucose levels. Modern neural networks can already determine conditions like Parkinson's disease, depression, and diabetes from a voice. Thus, every spoken sound is not just information, but a biometric signal that can hide a whole diagnosis. Fact 23. Teeth are the strongest part of the body. Their enamel is harder than steel and can withstand pressure of hundreds of kilograms. However, a tooth is a living structure. Inside, there is pulp, vessels, nerves, connective tissue. It is not just a pain conductor, it is the center of the tooth's life. Teeth develop long before they erupt. Milk teeth from the 6th week of gestation, permanent teeth from birth but hidden. Each person has an individual dental passport: shape, position, bite, microcracks. Forensic experts can identify a person with astonishing accuracy by their teeth. Surprisingly, teeth react not only to food and hygiene, but also to stress. Under chronic tension, people unconsciously clench their jaws or grind their teeth in their sleep, bruxism. This leads to enamel wear, microcracks, neck pain, and even headaches. Another nuance is that teeth cannot heal. Unlike bones, they do not regenerate. Damaged enamel does not recover. Therefore, cavities are not just a hole, but an irreversible loss. Yet, teeth possess a powerful resource. Modern research shows that the condition of teeth can indicate vitamin deficiencies, stomach diseases, and even the risk of cardiac pathologies. A smile is not just about aesthetics, it is a summary of how the entire body functions. Fact 24th. Memory is not a static shelf in the brain. It is a process that occurs in motion through chemistry, electricity, and time. There is short-term memory, lasting seconds and minutes, which operates in the frontal lobes and is supported by an active neural network. There is long-term memory, located in the temporal lobes, particularly in the hippocampus. It is this convoluted organ, shaped like a seahorse, that rewrites the temporary into the permanent. This requires sleep, repetition, and emotions. Without emotions, information is absorbed less effectively. Adrenaline and dopamine enhance memorization, which is why we better remember vivid events. Furthermore, memory is not a warehouse, but an editor. Each time we recall something, we slightly alter that memory, as if rewriting a file. Therefore, memories change over the years, distorting under the pressure of new information. There is also motor memory, movements that are absorbed into the body, such as riding a bicycle or playing the piano. It is difficult to explain in words, but the body remembers. And there is emotional memory, associative, where a smell or sound triggers a memory. Scientists still debate where exactly memory lives, but one thing is clear: it is not fixed in one place, but is scattered throughout the entire cortex, united in patterns. Memory is not an archive, but a network that grows, breathes, loses, and restores connections. And more is recorded in this network than we can recall. Fact 25th. Reaction time is one of the most accurate reflections of the body's condition. On average, the time from when the eye registers a flash to when a finger presses a button is about 250 milliseconds. This is not just a number. It's the result of several systems working together: visual, nervous, and motor. Light hits the retina, transforms into an electrical impulse, travels along the optic nerve to the occipital lobe of the brain. From there, the signal is transmitted to the frontal cortex, where a decision is made, and then down the spinal cord to the muscles. Any glitch in this pathway slows down the reaction. For trained individuals, such as race car drivers or esports athletes, it can be less than 160 milliseconds. Conversely, for those who are tired, drunk, or sick, it can exceed 400 milliseconds. Interestingly, reaction to sound is usually faster than to light, because the path from the ear to the brain is shorter. Reaction to pain is the slowest. The signal must first reach the thalamus, undergo filtering, and gain emotional coloring. In clinical practice, reaction time is used as an indicator of cognitive health, and in sports, as a criterion for readiness. This is one of the rare instances where the brain, muscles, and emotions work in sync. And when you hit the brakes on the highway, it's not just a reflex. It's a symphony of lightning-fast decisions played out in fractions of a second. Fact 26th. The scalp is a separate ecosystem. It is thinner than on other parts of the body, is permeated with blood vessels, and contains up to 100,000 hair follicles. Each follicle is connected to a sebaceous gland, which produces sebum. This sebum protects the hair and prevents moisture evaporation. However, the balance is fragile. Excess sebum leads to inflammation, dandruff, and itching. A deficiency causes dryness and brittleness. Scalp cells renew every 3 to 4 weeks, but if the microflora is disturbed, the process becomes chaotic. Hundreds of types of bacteria and fungi live on the skin, including Malassea, a yeast-like fungus that causes seborrheic dermatitis when overactivated. Surprisingly, this microflora reacts to hormones, stress, and diet. During excitement, sebum production can increase. With vitamin deficiency, hair growth slows down. The scalp also participates in thermoregulation. In heat, blood vessels dilate, releasing heat. This results in pronounced sweating. In the 2020s, trichology, the science of the scalp and hair, began to develop rapidly. Research shows that the condition of this area affects not only appearance, but also overall well-being. Scalp massage, it turns out, is not just pleasant. It improves microcirculation, affects cortisol levels, and can even improve sleep quality. The scalp is not just a place for a hairstyle. It is a regulator, a mirror, and a sensor, all in one. Fact 27th. The skeleton is not merely a framework. It functions as a factory, an archive, and an alarm system. It constitutes approximately 15% of body mass and comprises 206 bones in an adult. However, bones are not inert material. Within them, constant construction is underway. Osteoblasts build, osteoclasts break down, and osteocytes monitor. The complete renewal cycle of the skeleton takes about 10 years. Each bone is surrounded by the periosteum, a sensitive membrane with vessels and nerves. This is what causes pain during injuries. Inside large bones lies bone marrow, where blood cells are formed. Bones also serve as a reserve of calcium and phosphorus. In cases of deficiency, the body withdraws them from the bones, and in cases of excess, it deposits them. But if this balance is disrupted, osteoporosis begins. The skeleton also participates in endocrine regulation. In 2007, osteocalcin was discovered, a hormone released by bone tissue. It influences glucose metabolism, testosterone, and even memory. And another surprise, bones are sensory organs. Within them are nerve endings capable of responding to pressure and load. Therefore, moderate physical activity strengthens the skeleton, while inactivity weakens it. It turns out that bones are not just a framework. They are an active, living system that sensitively responds to movement, nutrition, hormones, and even mood. Fact 28. The tongue is an organ of remarkable complexity. It is composed of 8 muscles, not attached to bones, which makes it the most mobile in the body. It participates in speech, chewing, swallowing, and, of course, taste. On its surface are thousands of taste buds, each containing up to 100 receptor cells. They distinguish 5 basic tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami, a savory, rich flavor discovered relatively recently. The distribution of tastes by zones is a myth. Every area of the tongue senses all tastes, just with varying intensity. But beyond taste, the tongue analyzes temperature, texture, and spiciness. It houses some of the most sensitive receptors. It is constantly renewing itself. Taste cells live for about 10 days. The tongue also reflects health status. White coating, cracks, changes in shape, all these can be signs of illness, vitamin deficiency, or digestive problems. The tongue also has a unique print. Its shape, folds, and mobility are unique. In Eastern medicine, tongue diagnosis is a whole discipline, and modern dentists use 3D tongue scanning as a biometric tool. Interestingly, the tongue forms sounds, but not on its own. It works in an ensemble with the palate, lips, and larynx. It is not just a piece of muscle. It is an instrument of speech, taste, emotions, and health. Fact 29th. Sweat glands are active not only in hot weather. They also activate during stress, anxiety, pain, and even moments of sudden joy. This phenomenon is called emotional sweat. Apocrine glands, concentrated in the armpits and groin, produce a thicker, oilier secretion than eccrine glands, which are evenly distributed throughout the body. It is the apocrine glands that are responsible for body odor, as their secretion quickly becomes food for the bacteria living on the skin. This results in a unique individual body scent, so distinct that dogs can distinguish people even after a long absence by a single t-shirt. Interestingly, in romantic relationships, couples often choose partners whose scent differs significantly in certain proteins of the major histocompatibility complex, which may enhance the immune resistance of their offspring. In experiments, women were asked to smell men's t-shirts and choose the most pleasant scent, and most often, a genetically compatible but not identical scent profile was selected. This means that sweat glands do more than just cool the body. They are involved in communication, mate selection, and recognition. Their activity is linked less to climate and more to context, an important meeting, an exam, fear, or embarrassment, and the body instantly communicates this to others. It's a wordless language, readable by the trace of moisture on the temple. Fact 30th. Tears are not merely water from the eyes. Their composition is a complex mixture of water, salts, proteins, lipids, hormones, and even traces of neuropeptides. There are three types of tears: basal, which constantly lubricate the eye; reflex, produced in response to irritation; and emotional. It is the latter that sparks the most interest. Emotional tears appear not only during sadness, but also in moments of intense joy, pain, or relief. They differ in composition, containing more stress hormones like adrenocorticotropic hormone and prolactin. This indicates that crying is not just a reaction, but a way for the body to release tension. Interestingly, not all mammals cry from emotions. Dogs and cats only produce tears due to physical irritation. Human tears, however, have become a part of social communication. Studies show that a face covered in tears is perceived by others as more honest, vulnerable, and evoking sympathy. Yet, there is a flip side. In some individuals, tears are blocked under stress as the body enters a state of hypercontrol. This can lead to psychological blockages. Tears are not a weakness, but a physiological reset. Their composition is a biochemical diary of experiences. They wash away not only dust from the eyes, but also some of the accumulated inner feelings. Fact 31st. The navel, a small indentation on the abdomen that we get used to from childhood, is actually an important trace of a vast system that worked before birth. Through the umbilical cord, the fetus received oxygen, nutrients, and immune bodies, and in return, it gave off carbon dioxide and metabolic waste. Inside it are two arteries and one vein, surrounded by a jelly-like tissue called Wharton's jelly, which protected the vessels from kinks. After birth, the umbilical cord is clamped and cut. Blood flow in it stops, and separation processes begin in the body. The heart and lungs start to work autonomously. The liver and kidneys take over filtration. But traces of the umbilical cord remain, in the liver as a round ligament and in the bladder as a median ligament. The navel itself is a skin and scar formation, and each one is unique. Studies of naval microflora have shown that dozens of types of bacteria can live on it, including those not found anywhere else on the body. Some people have a forest ecosystem, others a sea one. This depends on hygiene, clothing, climate zone, and even profession. Historically, the navel was an object of mysticism, a symbol, and even a fashion item. But most importantly, it reminds us that each of us was once part of another body. And this scar is not just a mark. It is the first point of connection with life. Fact 32nd. The pharynx serves as a junction for breathing and eating. It connects the nasal and oral cavities with the larynx and esophagus. Each time we swallow, the body performs a delicate coordination. The epiglottis, a cartilaginous valve, closes the entrance to the trachea to prevent food from entering the airways. This process takes fractions of a second and is regulated by dozens of nerves and muscles. Any disruption can lead to choking. Interestingly, the human larynx is positioned higher than in most mammals. This allows for a wide range of sounds, but makes us vulnerable to suffocation. In infants, the larynx is even higher, enabling them to suck and breathe simultaneously. It lowers later. During speech and singing, the epiglottis acts like a director, guiding airflow, modulating sound, and protecting breathing. In vomiting, the entire system switches to reverse. Muscle waves move upward, the diaphragm pushes from below, and the pharynx opens the way out. The pharynx is one of the few areas where will and automaticism converge. We can initiate swallowing consciously, but its completion is purely automatic. This illustrates how the body, at the crossroads of vital functions, solves a task in real time, hundreds of times a day, without errors, almost always. Fact 33rd. Tendons are the body's ropes. They connect muscles to bones, transmit force, and can withstand loads of hundreds of kilograms. The strongest are the Achilles tendons, connecting the calf muscles to the heel bone. They can withstand a tensile force of several tons, yet remain elastic. When a person jumps, tendons store elastic energy and then release it, enhancing the push-off. This makes movement economical. For a runner, up to 50% of energy comes not from muscles, but from the recoil of tendons. They themselves are composed of collagen fibers arranged in parallel bundles covered by a sheath containing synovial fluid for gliding. However, unlike muscles, tendons have very little blood supply. Therefore, their recovery after injuries is slow and unpredictable. Tendinitis, the inflammation of tendons, is one of the most common problems for athletes and office workers. Overload, microtraumas, and lack of recovery cause the structure to start disintegrating. What's particularly interesting is that tendons can remember loads. In trained individuals, they thicken and become stronger. In sedentary people, they weaken. Modern medicine is developing methods to stimulate tendon growth, from ultrasound to biological injections. This is because these invisible threads are key elements in every step, lift, and touch. Fact 34th. The cerebellum, long considered merely a coordinator of movements, has in the 21st century been understood to participate in speech, attention, learning, and even emotions. Its structure resembles a head of cauliflower, dense, folded, and symmetrical. It contains over half of all brain neurons, despite occupying only 10% of the brain's volume. Its primary function is precision. It receives copies of all signals the brain sends to muscles, compares them with the actual outcome, and makes adjustments. Consequently, damage to the cerebellum leads to tremors, unsteadiness, and slowed movements. However, it also possesses cognitive functions. Children with cerebellar impairments show difficulties with speech and writing. Adults experience problems with shifting attention, predicting events, and the sense of time. The cerebellum acts like an internal metronome, a rhythm keeper, an editor. In 2019, neuroimaging studies revealed its activity during logical problem-solving and emotional expression. It was found to be involved in managing the smoothness not only of movements, but also of thoughts. This is unsurprising, as thoughts are also a form of movement, albeit an internal one. The cerebellum is an invisible conductor that, unnoticed by us, maintains the tempo, rhythm, and clarity in everything we do or think. 35th fact. Hormones are the body's molecular messengers. They are produced in endocrine glands, enter the bloodstream, and act on tissues sometimes located thousands of kilometers away. Some act as accelerators, like adrenaline and thyroxine. Others as brakes, for example, melatonin. There are flash hormones, like oxytocin, released during touch and childbirth. And there are background hormones, like insulin, which regulates sugar levels. Surprisingly, the same hormone can cause different effects depending on the tissue. Adrenaline in the heart speeds up the pulse, in the skin constricts blood vessels, and in the liver releases glucose. The hormonal system works on a feedback principle. If a hormone level rises, the pituitary gland reduces the signal for its production. If it falls, it strengthens it. This maintains balance. Disruptions lead to dramatic consequences. Excess cortisol to insomnia and obesity, a deficiency of thyroid hormones to lethargy and swelling. And sex hormones, estrogen and testosterone, affect not only reproduction but also memory, mood, and behavior. Modern endocrinology views hormones as universal regulators. They do not command but suggest, amplifying or weakening signals. And the entire life of the organism is a symphony, where hormones set the tone for every phrase, every action, every sensation. Fact 36. Lymph is an unnoticed yet vital river within the body. It flows through its own vessels, running parallel to veins, and serves as a channel for cleansing, transport, and immune surveillance. Approximately 2 liters of fluid pass through the lymphatic system daily. It collects excess water, proteins, cell debris, bacteria, and even cancer cells from tissues, carrying them to lymph nodes where filtration occurs. The nodes are true outposts of immunity. Macrophages and lymphocytes inspect every cargo, destroying anything dangerous. If a node is overloaded, it enlarges and can become painful. Lymph moves slowly without a heart, propelled by muscle contractions and the pressure of breathing. This is why a sedentary lifestyle leads to swelling. Lymph becomes stagnant. The uniqueness of the lymphatic system lies in its closed nature, yet it is not airtight. Lymph can exit vessels and re-enter them. In the brain, a special glymphatic system is open, cleansing tissues during sleep. Impaired lymph flow can result in lymphedema, persistent, severe, and difficult to reverse swelling. Nevertheless, lymph is a promising direction in medicine. It can be used to deliver medications, diagnose diseases, and regulate inflammation. It is not a second circulatory system as previously thought, but an independent yet closely connected network. A silent guard on duty throughout the body. Fact 37th. The gut microbiome is an invisible civilization living inside us, influencing every aspect of health from digestion to mood. Trillions of microorganisms, bacteria, fungi, viruses, reside on the walls of the small and large intestines, their genome being 100 times larger than our own. These tiny inhabitants break down complex carbohydrates and fiber, synthesize B and K vitamins, and participate in drug metabolism. Crucially, they communicate with us. Through the thin intestinal lining, microorganisms send signaling molecules, short-chain fatty acids, indoles, balavates, which enter the bloodstream and affect immunity, metabolism, and well-being. For instance, butyrate, produced from fiber fermentation, nourishes intestinal epithelial cells, strengthens the barrier, and reduces inflammation. The occurrence of dysbiosis, an imbalance of microbes, is linked to a range of diseases, from irritable bowel syndrome and obesity to autoimmune disorders and depression. Gut bacteria can alter neurotransmitter production. Serotonin, dopamine, and gamma-aminobutyric acid are formed not only in the brain but also in the gut, and their deficiency leads to mood changes. Scientists have even found that transplanting fecal microbiota from happy individuals to anxious ones reduces anxiety symptoms in mice. The microbiome is not just a passenger but a subtle regulator of internal physiological orchestras. In the future, we might treat diseases not with pills but by tuning our invisible universe. Fact 38. Brown adipose tissue is a hidden reservoir of heat and energy, preserved in the human body from the era of ancestors who lived in cold climates. Unlike white fat, which serves for insulation and calorie storage, brown adipocytes are rich in mitochondria and densely permeated with blood vessels. At low temperatures, they are activated through the sympathetic nervous system, initiating the oxidation of fatty acids and glycogen. Instead of ATP synthesis, they produce pure heat, a process called thermogenesis. Newborns have the most brown tissue in the neck and shoulder areas, but adults also retain enough of it to significantly contribute to maintaining body temperature. Recent studies have shown that lean individuals have higher brown fat activity than overweight individuals, which may influence the risk of metabolic diseases. Surprisingly, moderate amounts of cold water, regular walks in the cold, and diets rich in capsaicin and caffeine stimulate the awakening of brown tissue reserves. Its thermogenic cells can even reprogram some white fat, making it similar to brown fat, so-called beige fat.
This phenomenon opens up prospects for treating obesity and type 2 diabetes not only through diet and physical activity, but also by activating the body's own fuel generator. Brown adipose tissue is a quiet engine capable of turning cold into health and longevity.
Fact 39th. Deep within every cell lies an organelle that, until 50 years ago, was not recognized as a separate entity, the mitochondrion. It resembles a small power plant, two membranes, with the inner one folded into cristae, where adenosine triphosphate, the body's fuel for all reactions, is synthesized. But a mitochondrion is more than just a reactor. It possesses its own DNA, inherited solely from the mother, and up to 2,500 genes that control not only energy production, but also signaling, apoptosis, programmed cell death, and even thermoregulation. As early as 1962, Lynn Margulis proposed the endosymbiotic hypothesis, suggesting that an ancient bacterium entered a cell, giving rise to the mitochondrion. This was supported by the similarity of their genomes to bacteria ones, revolutionizing the understanding of eukaryotic life's origin. However, mitochondria are not uniform. A sprinter's muscles may contain twice as many as an average person's, and neurons even more, as the brain requires up to 20% of the body's total energy while making up only 2% of its mass. When mitochondria malfunction, a spectrum of mitochondrial diseases arises, including muscle weakness, kidney and liver problems, heart issues, and neurological disorders. One of the rarest forms is Leigh syndrome, first described in 1974, where lactic acid buildup in the brain leads to seizures and vision loss. But there's an unexpected twist. Mitochondria participate in regulating the immune response. Upon viral attack, they change shape, release protective signaling molecules, and initiate inflammation. In 2025, scientists from the Albert Einstein Institute discovered that mitochondrial DNA, ejected from a cell under stress, can act as an alarm bell, activating macrophages and lymphocytes in lymph nodes. It turns out these tiny power plants are not just fuel reservoirs, but living communication nodes between energetics, cell death, and the body's defense. Their legacy from ancient bacteria continues in every heartbeat and every thought. Fact 40. Within the patterns of brain neural waves lies a special cleansing system, the glymphatic system, discovered only in 2012 by researchers from the University of Rochester School of Medicine. It resembles a fine network of channels through which cerebrospinal fluid and interstitial fluid exchange, removing metabolic byproducts, beta amyloid, tau proteins, excess calcium, and toxic fractions. During sleep, especially in the deep slow-wave sleep phase, brain capillaries widen, the space between neurons increases by 30%, and foreign molecules are flushed out via perivascular pathways. This mechanism has proven critical for preventing neurodegeneration. In 2018, neurophysiologists from Harvard Medical School demonstrated that mice with artificially impaired glymphatic systems rapidly accumulated beta amyloid plaques, a hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. In human volunteers, in an experiment published in Nature Neuroscience, a 20% improvement in sleep depth through audiovisual stimulation increased glymphatic system efficiency by 30%. Unexpectedly, this mechanism also affects other areas. The glymphatic system participates in distributing medications throughout the brain, particularly large molecules, paving the way for more effective therapy for tumors and neuropathies. Another discovery from the 2000s is the link between glymphatic system pathology and migraines. Morning pain and cognitive fog may be associated with the accumulation of metabolic waste in the intercellular space. Thus, our brain not only processes information, but also regularly erases digital garbage, maintaining clarity of perception. This invisible order is key to healthy, long-lasting mental acuity. Fact 41. Osteoporosis is a silent bone destroyer that may not reveal itself until a minor fall leads to a fracture. In an adult human body, the skeleton renews itself every 10 years. Osteoblasts create new mineral matrix, while osteoclasts break down the old one. Normally, these processes are balanced, but with age and hormonal changes, the balance shifts towards resorption. This is particularly true for women after menopause. A decrease in estrogen levels doubles the activity of osteoclasts, leading to a loss of up to 5% of bone mass annually. Osteoporosis diagnosis relies on densitometry, specifically dual-energy X-ray absorptiometry (DEXA) methods, first used in the clinic of the University of Copenhagen in 1985. It allows measurement of the density of the femur and lumbar spine, detecting a decrease in mineral content even with a 15% loss. However, there are also unexpected factors. A study conducted in 2020 at the University of Toronto showed that regular physical activity, not just running or strength training, but also vigorous uphill walking, stimulates bone tissue formation, increasing density by 7% in 6 months. Another discovery is the role of vitamin K2. French scientists in 1993 established that it activates osteocalcin, a hormone produced by bone tissue, improving calcium binding. A warning sign is a vertebral or hip fracture in an elderly person, which increases the risk of mortality within a year by 30%. Therefore, osteoporosis prevention and early diagnosis are matters of public health. Treatment includes not only calcium and vitamin D, but also osteoclast modulator drugs like bisphosphonates and denosumab. It turns out that the skeleton is a flexible and resilient system, but without constant load and hormonal support, it can become a source of weakness and risk. Fact 42. The skeleton not only provides structure to the body, but also stores calcium, regulating its blood levels. When ion concentration drops, the parathyroid glands produce parathormone, which stimulates osteoclast cells to release minerals from bone. However, prolonged stimulation leads to structural damage. Bones lose density and become porous. Interestingly, the human body has a bone remodeling with memory mechanism. According to a study from the University of Cambridge in 2020, areas subjected to stress retain increased density even after the stress stops, while dead zones, like the base of the skull, become more fragile with age. The skeleton is also not a static system. Small bones in the hands and feet contain up to 45% of all small osteopathic vessels responsible for microcirculation in tissues. These vessels nourish pericytes, which regulate the formation of new bone tissue in response to microcracks, tiny fissures that occur with every step or movement. This process was discovered in 1988 at the Orthopedics Institute of Lund University. An unexpected detail: the skeleton participates in endocrine regulation. Osteocalcin, a bone matrix hormone, influences not only bone density, but also the pancreas, stimulating insulin production and sperm quality in men, increasing their motility. As a result, the body receives a feedback system. Bones help regulate carbohydrate metabolism and reproductive health. Thus, our skeleton is not just a frame, but an active endocrine and sensory organ, sensing loads, remembering them, and informing other systems about the need for adaptation. Fact 43. The thymus, also known as the thymus gland, is one of the most mysterious organs of the immune system. Located behind the sternum, it reaches its maximum size by the age of 2 years and then gradually atrophies, turning into fatty tissue by the age of 20. However, it is in childhood that the thymus performs its main mission. It is here that T lymphocytes, the key cells of cellular immunity, are trained. The gland has a complex architecture of cortical and medullary substance separated by a basal membrane, where immature T cells undergo rigorous selection stages in the cortical layer. They acquire receptors capable of recognizing foreign antigens while ignoring the body's own molecules. If such selection does not occur, autoimmunity develops. Cells attack their own tissues. Interestingly, under stress, infections, or even radiation, the thymus can shrink, and then immunity temporarily weakens. But after the threat is eliminated, the gland restores its size and function, as if drawing resources from internal reserves. Experiments on mice have shown that introducing cytokines, such as interleukin-7, can cause atrophied thymus to regenerate, restoring its architecture. This opens prospects for therapies for age-related immune weakening.
It turns out that the thymus is not just a relic of a young organism, but a dynamic center upon which the ability to resist infections and maintain health throughout life largely depends.
Fact 44th. The pancreas serves as a dual chef for digestion and endocrine regulation. Situated deep within the abdominal cavity, it comprises two components: the exocrine part, which produces pancreatic juice for breaking down proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, and the endocrine part, represented by the islets of Langerhans. Each islet contains several types of cells. Alpha cells synthesize glucagon, which stimulates an increase in blood glucose levels. Beta cells secrete insulin, lowering sugar and enabling glucose uptake by cells. Delta cells release somatostatin, regulating the secretion of neighboring cells. And PP cells produce pancreatic polypeptide to control appetite and gastrointestinal motility. The balance between these hormones is delicate. Excessive strain on beta cells due to persistently high glucose levels leads to their exhaustion and the development of type 2 diabetes. Autoimmune attacks on beta cells result in type 1 diabetes. The islets are distributed irregularly, their frequency ranging from 1.5 to 3% of the gland's total mass, but their hormonal effect is systemic. Insulin influences fat and protein metabolism and regulates cell growth, while glucagon provides the body's energy reserve. In laboratories, islet transplantation is used to treat diabetes, but its effectiveness remains limited due to rejection reactions and the need for immunosuppression. The pancreas is a dual motor organ where each component must work in unison for us to digest food and maintain a steady energy level.
Fact 45th. The spleen acts as an invisible blood filter and a reservoir for immune reserves. This organ, weighing approximately 150 grams, is divided into two zones: the red pulp, consisting of venous sinuses, and the white pulp, made up of lymphoid follicles. In the red pulp, blood flow slows down, allowing macrophages to engulf aged red blood cells, and stored platelets are ready for mobilization in case of bleeding. The white pulp contains clusters of T and B lymphocytes, which, upon encountering antigens, synthesize antibodies and initiate cell-mediated responses. Normally, the spleen holds up to 30% of all circulating platelets and a significant portion of lymphocytes, releasing them in emergency situations. Following spleen removal, splenectomy, for instance, due to trauma, the risk of bacterial infections, particularly pneumococcal ones, increases, and patients are prescribed vaccination and antibiotic prophylaxis for lifelong protection. A unique feature of the spleen is its ability to expand and contract. It enlarges when there is an increased need for blood purification and shrinks when the load decreases, adapting to hemodynamics. In fetuses, the spleen participates in hematopoiesis until the bone marrow develops, and in adults, it remains an important reservoir for immune cells. Therefore, the spleen is not just a filter organ, but a mobile base of immunity and a blood quality control station.
Fact 46th. Nails are tough keratin plates that grow at a rate of about 3 millimeters per month, and each one captures the story of our lifestyle. Beneath the nail plate lies the nail root, situated under the cuticle, where new cells are formed packed with the protein keratin. Their division depends on nutrition, hormonal balance, and overall health. A deficiency in vitamin B, iron, or thyroid issues can slow growth and make the plate brittle. The nail's color reflects blood supply and cardiovascular health. A pink hue indicates good oxygenation, while paleness or blueness might suggest anemia or blood flow problems. Transverse grooves on the nail surface can appear after fever or severe stress, while longitudinal ridges often emerge with age. Signs of damage, white dots and spots, result from micro-injuries to the root and growth area, and chipped edges and hangnails indicate dry skin and a lack of fatty acids. Remarkably, nails can regenerate after injury if the lunula and root are undamaged. In forensics, human identification is sometimes made from microscopic traces on the nail plate.
Nails are not just a hand adornment, they are a living monitoring panel of the body's internal processes and an external resonator of our habits, from diet to stress, captured in their slow growth.
Fact 47th. Lungs are not merely bags for breathing, but a vast biofilter and a gas exchange surface comparable in size to a tennis court. The total area of alveoli, the tiny sacs into which bronchi branch, reaches up to 70 square meters. Each inhalation delivers oxygen into a fine network of capillaries. A single alveolus has a wall half a micron thick, through which gas passes in fractions of a second. At birth, lungs fill with air for the first time, a moment accompanied by the release of surfactant, a special substance that prevents alveoli from collapsing during exhalation. This lung surfactant emulsifier was first described by John Nichols in 1963, saving thousands of premature infants. Daily, lungs process up to 12,000 liters of air, trapping dust, allergens, and microbes using the cilia of bronchioles and mucus that drains to the throat. Macrophages in the alveolar sacs silently consume ingested particles. During physical exertion, minute ventilation volume can increase 20-fold, maintaining the symmetry of airflow, and the lungs adapt instantly. They regulate not only oxygen and carbon dioxide levels, but also the blood's acid-base balance, a crucial part of homeostasis.
Fact 48. Blood vessels form an extensive network stretching for hundreds of thousands of kilometers throughout the body, akin to a global life highway. Arteries carry blood away from the heart under high pressure. For instance, the aorta can withstand pressures up to 160 millimeters of mercury and pumps approximately 15 liters per minute during exertion. Its elasticity is due to elastic fibers, discovered by Edward Berlin in 1922, which helps smooth out pulse waves. Arteries then divide into arterioles and capillaries, measuring 6 to 8 micrometers in diameter. Through these capillaries, red blood cells pass one by one, squeezing through and delivering oxygen to tissues. The total length of capillaries is estimated at 80,000 kilometers, enough to circle the Earth's equator twice. Venules and veins return blood to the heart, and venous valves prevent backflow, particularly in the legs when standing. Any disruption, such as stagnation or thrombosis, can lead to serious consequences, from varicose veins to thromboembolism. In medicine, pulse pressure and the cross-sectional area of vessels are measured to assess the risk of hypertension and atherosclerosis. The vascular endothelium, lining the inner surface of arteries and veins, releases nitric oxide, the main regulator of vascular tone, discovered by Robert Furchtgott and Farid Murad in 1980s. This is a delicate system that literally controls how every cell in the body functions.
Fact 49th. The blood-brain barrier is an invisible wall separating the bloodstream from the delicate environment of the central nervous system. Described in 1909 by Edwin Goldman and Paul Ehrenheim, it consists of specialized capillary endothelial cells connected by tight junctions, supported by brain astrocytes. These tight junctions block toxic substances, microorganisms, and almost 100% of foreign molecules, allowing only glucose, amino acids, and essential lipids to pass. The barrier is active. Substance transport is regulated by carriers and pumps that function as biomechanical gates. During inflammation or injury, its permeability can sharply increase, leading to brain swelling and neurological symptoms. The central nervous system lacks a traditional lymphatic system, but the recently discovered glymphatic network in the perivascular space interacts with the barrier, improving the removal of waste products from deep brain structures. Developing drugs that can overcome this wall has become a challenge of the century. To reach tumors or alter neurochemical processes, molecules that disguise themselves as natural carriers are needed. Fact 50. Cartilage tissue acts as a resilient cushion between bones, absorbing impacts and allowing joints to move silently. The human body contains 3 types of cartilage: hyaline cartilage, which covers the ends of bones and joints; elastic cartilage, found in the ears and larynx; and fibrous cartilage, located in intervertebral discs and symphyses. Hyaline cartilage, as a component of the synovial joint surface, is formed by chondrocytes embedded in an acellular matrix of type II collagen and proteoglycans that retain water. This structure possesses hydrodynamic elasticity. When compressed, fluid is squeezed out, creating additional resistance. And upon relaxation, it returns, much like a sponge. Synovial fluid, or synovia, nourishes the cartilage and reduces friction during movement. Its chemical composition and viscosity are regulated by synoviocytes of the inner capsule lining. In osteoarthritis, due to wear and tear, hyaline cartilage degrades, leading to inflammation and the loss of joint cushioning. Restoring cartilage is difficult because it lacks blood supply, so doctors resort to cell therapy, transplanting artificially grown chondrocytes or introducing stem cells with directed differentiation. This is an active area of regenerative medicine where success depends on precise biochemistry and mechanical cell stimulation. Cartilage is not just a cushion, but a complex system of smart lubrication, without which any walking would turn into pain and the noise of bending. Fact 51. Inside every cell in our body is an amazing transport complex, the endoplasmic reticulum. It is a network of flat channels and vesicles that surround the nucleus and permeates the entire cytoplasmic space, much like a city subway system. The endoplasmic reticulum is divided into two zones: the rough ER with attached ribosomes where proteins are synthesized, and the smooth ER without ribosomes where lipids, steroid hormones are produced and toxins are detoxified. In the rustle of its membranes, liver cell enzymes are born, and the veins of every organ receive a clean metabolic product. But most importantly, it is a quality control system. After protein assembly in the rough ER membrane sections, protein molecules fold into spatial structures that determine their function. An error triggers a reticulum stress signal. The cell either activates the chaperone system, which restores protein shape, or initiates apoptosis, programs cell death to prevent defects from leading to tumors. Thus, each cell checks thousands of proteins daily, and only correctly folded ones are sent to the Golgi apparatus, where they receive carbohydrate stamps and are dispatched along internal postal routes to membranes, lysosomes, or outside the cell. The endoplasmic reticulum is not just a factory, but a center of monitoring and control. During a viral infection, the reticulum triggers autophagy, a mechanism of eating its own parts to destroy viral proteins. And with excess lipids, for example during obesity, it expands smooth cavities to process fat. It turns out that this network within our cells is the main conductor of their metabolic symphonies and a barometer of health at the molecular level. Fact 52nd. The small intestine is the longest and most complex part of the digestive tract, measuring about 6 meters in length. It is divided into 3 sections: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. It is responsible not only for the chemical breakdown of food — pancreatic enzymes and bile emulsify fats, and peptasis break down proteins — but also for the fine absorption of nutrients, amino acids, fatty acids, glucose, vitamins, and mineral salts. The mucous membrane of the small intestine is covered with millions of villi and microvilli, which increase the absorption surface area to the size of a tennis court. Enterocyte cells actively transport substances across the membrane, using the sodium-potassium pump and specific transporters. Pathologies such as celiac disease, gluten intolerance, are responsible for the impairment of this function, where the immune system damages the villi, reducing the overall absorption area and leading to nutrient deficiencies. But the small intestine is not only a plus for nutrient molecules, but also a minus for microbes. Mucus secreted by goblet cells forms a protective layer, and Pear's patches, collections of lymphoid tissue where T and B lymphocytes monitor antigens, act within the lumen. Upon encountering pathogens, local immunity is activated, and the secretion of immunoglobulin A into the intestinal lumen suppresses the growth of harmful bacteria.
Thus, the small intestine acts simultaneously as a giant digestion laboratory, a biochemical filter, and an immune garrison, where the finest mechanisms of absorption and protection work in unison, ensuring our nutrition and health. Fact 53rd. The neurotransmitter serotonin, known as the molecule of happiness, is a key regulator of many bodily processes, from mood and sleep to vascular tone and digestive tract function. It's noteworthy that approximately 95% of serotonin in an adult human body is synthesized not in the brain, but in the enterochromaffin cells of the small and large intestines. Here, the amino acid tryptophan is converted with the help of the enzyme tryptophan hydroxylase into 5-hydroxytryptamine, which is then decarboxylated into active serotonin. Some molecules enter the bloodstream and affect vascular tone. During hypotension, they constrict arteries, raising blood pressure. The main function, however, is paracrine. Serotonin regulates intestinal motility, stimulating peristalsis and fluid secretion. An excess of it leads to diarrhea, while a deficiency causes constipation. In the brain, serotonin is produced in the Raphe nuclei of the pons and spreads through the upper and lower Raphe pathways to the cortex, limbic system, and brainstem structures. Here, it acts through 7 types of receptors, influencing mood, sleep, appetite, and pain perception. Antidepressants from the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, SSRI, block the SERT transporter, increasing serotonin concentration in the synaptic cleft and restoring normal signal transmission. Thus, serotonin is not just a joy hormone, but a universal mediator connecting the digestive, vascular, and nervous systems. It demonstrates how gut metabolism directly impacts brain function, and how imbalance in one system affects the health of the entire body. Fact 54th. The enzyme ATP synthase is at the core of all cellular respiration reactions. It is a massive protein complex embedded within the mitochondrial membrane. This complex comprises a rotor and a static module, together forming a molecular turbine. The proton gradient generated by the electron transport chain drives the rotation of the rotor. This mechanical rotational energy is then utilized to synthesize adenosine transphosphate, ATP, from adenosine diphosphate and phosphate. Each ATP synthase molecule contains over 20 subunits organized into 2 major domains, F0 and F1. The F0 subdomain forms a channel through which protons move from the intermembrane space into the matrix. The F1 domain is a spherical structure where ATP synthesis occurs at 3 catalytic sites. A single ATP synthase molecule can produce up to 100 ATP molecules per second, providing energy for muscle contraction, neuron function, and all active transport processes. Dysfunctions in this enzyme lead to severe mitochondrial myopathies. Specifically, mutations in genes encoding F0 subunits cause Naegeli breakage syndrome, a congenital tissue hypoxia that manifests as impaired muscle and heart development. Therefore, ATP synthase is not merely a biochemical catalyst, but a micro-turbo power station for every cell, converting nanoscale mechanical rotation into energy that fuels the entire organism, from blinking to running. Fact 55. Every second, thousands of new proteins are formed in the human body, enzymes, signals, and cell building blocks. But before they start working, each polypeptide undergoes post-translational modification. Carbohydrate chains are attached to it in the endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi apparatus, a process called glycosylation. These oligosaccharide bracelets determine the protein's fate, where to direct it, how long to keep it in membranes, how and with whom to interact. Each department of the Golgi apparatus tries on its labels. In one, mannose phosphate is added for delivery to lysosomes. In another, N-acetylglucosamine for secretion. An error in the sugar sequence causes the protein to get stuck, induce ER stress, and can lead to diseases like Gaucher disease or Tay-Sachs disease, genetic disorders of the lysosomal pathway. Interestingly, the diversity of the glycocode extends far beyond simple markers.
On the surface of immune system cells, oligosaccharides form a passport by which T lymphocytes and macrophages recognize self-tissues. During embryonic development, the cell's glycoprint changes, and this signal instructs cells to migrate, differentiate, and form organs. It turns out that the carbohydrate husk of proteins is not just decoration, but a code that programs the movement, metabolism, and interaction of all cells in the body. Fact 56. Erythrocytes, also known as red blood cells, have an average lifespan of 120 days and lack a nucleus to make more room for hemoglobin. However, without their life's passport, they could not join the greater circulation. Special oligosaccharide structures called snaxers appear on the surface of mature cells, and their composition changes as they age. Macrophages in the spleen and liver read this code. When N-acetylgalactosamine predominates over galactose on the erythrocyte membrane, it signals phagocytosis. If this mechanism malfunctions, such as an autoimmune hemolytic anemia, cells are destroyed prematurely. Interestingly, before destruction, an erythrocyte passes through the narrowest capillaries of the spleen, losing membrane plates and accumulating age markers. Only after a series of mechanical tests does it reach the macrophage station. This card check protects the body from the accumulation of old cells and frees up iron for new erythrocytes. Macrophages then synthesize bilirubin from hemoglobin, which the liver converts into bile pigments aiding in fat digestion. Thus, an erythrocyte's life is not just about oxygen delivery, but a complex cycle of labeling, filtration, and recycling built upon dozens of physical and biochemical mechanisms. Fact 57th. The blinking reflex is controlled by a complex, multi-level circuit. Corneal receptors detect irritations, such as pollen or bright light, and transmit signals via the trigeminal nerve to the brainstem's pons nuclei. There, motor commands are instantly generated. The facial nerve activates the orbicularis oculi muscle, causing the eyelid to close within 200 milliseconds. Simultaneously, other structures are engaged. The brainstem coordinates the synchronized contraction of the mouth circular muscle and neck muscles to protect not only vision, but also the airways. This system operates automatically, but can be consciously controlled, for instance, by holding the eyes open through willpower. In conditions like multiple sclerosis or traumatic brain injury, the circuit is disrupted. The visual cortex fails to issue the command, leading to asymmetric blinking, which doctors use for diagnosis. Interestingly, individuals with high emotional intelligence often show changes in their involuntary blinking rate depending on the context. Blinking slows down when reading text and speeds up when observing faces, optimizing visual scene processing. Thus, blinking is not merely eye protection, but a component of a sophisticated sensoromotor loop aimed at maximizing perceptual quality and ensuring bodily safety. Fact 58. A person's circadian rhythm is set by the master clock, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, SCN, of the hypothalamus. In its cells, the clock, BMAL1, and PER genes are rewritten daily. The peptide melatonin is synthesized, and a 24-hour cycle is formed at the molecular level. Light, falling on the retina, regulates the SCN's activity through the retinohypothalamic tract, suppressing melatonin release during the day and allowing it at night. But besides the central clock in the hypothalamus, there are local oscillators in the liver, heart, adipose tissue, and skin. They receive signals from the SCN, but can also adapt to nutrition and temperature. When changing time zones or working night shifts, desynchronosis occurs. Central and peripheral rhythms diverge, leading to disruptions in sleep, metabolism, and immunity. In the long term, jet lag is associated with an increased risk of metabolic syndromes and even cancer. Scientists are experimenting with chronobiological drugs aimed at synchronizing peripheral clocks. For example, agomelatine, which acts on melatonin receptors. It turns out that our body is not a monolith, but an orchestra of many biological metronomes, and the harmony between them determines health, energy, and longevity. Fact 59th. The kidneys are not merely filters, but a complex system of glandular capillaries and tubules. This system ensures homeostasis by regulating water, electrolyte, and acid-base balance. Each kidney contains approximately 1 million nephrons, which are the structural and functional units. Each nephron consists of the glomerulus, Bowman's capsule, and a system of tubules. Blood enters the kidney via the renal artery at a rate of about 1,200 milliliters per minute. Of this volume, approximately 200 milliliters are filtered through the capillary walls into the capsular space. The filtrate, an ultrafiltrate of plasma without proteins, passes through the proximal convoluted tubules, then the thin loop of Henle. In the loop of Henle, due to the osmotic gradient and differential permeability of the ascending and descending limbs, urine concentration occurs. Subsequently, the filtrate moves through the distal tubules and collecting ducts. In the collecting ducts, under the influence of the antidiuretic hormone, vasopressin, membrane permeability changes, regulating the volume of water excreted. When blood pressure drops, the adrenal glands release renin, initiating the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Angiotensin II constricts blood vessels and stimulates the adrenal cortex to produce aldosterone. Aldosterone enhances sodium and water reabsorption in the distal tubules, increasing blood volume and pressure. Simultaneously, the juxtaglomerular apparatus cells respond to reduced blood flow by secreting renin, and the macula densa responds to the concentration of chloride ions in the urine. Therefore, kidneys are not passive filters but an endocrine organ with feedback, maintaining the body's internal resources in response to the slightest fluctuations. Fact 60. The urinary bladder serves as a reservoir for urine. Its volume and shape are determined by the tone of the detrusor muscle, which forms the bladder wall, and by the coordinated activity of nerve centers in the spinal cord and brain. When the urine volume reaches 150 to 200 milliliters, the stretching of the walls activates mechanoreceptors. These receptors transmit signals via the pelvic nerves to segments S2 through S4 of the spinal cord, and from there to the micturition centers in the pons. Here, the urine parcel is registered, and if the social context is appropriate, a command is issued to relax the external urethral sphincter and contract the detrusor. The process of urination involves several stages: accumulation, storage, activation, and voiding. Each phase is strictly regulated by the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. In patients with spinal cord injuries above the S2 level, these phases are disrupted, potentially leading to a neurogenic bladder with incontinence or retention. Chemical mediators such as acetylcholine at the neuromuscular synapses cause detrusor contraction, while norepinephrine, acting through beta-3 adrenoreceptors, relaxes it during the accumulation phase. In clinical practice, for overactive bladder, muscarinic receptor antagonists like oxybutynin are used to reduce urgency. And for neurogenic disorders, sacral root electrical stimulation may be employed. The bladder is not merely a container for waste, but a dynamic organ whose coordinated function is vital for quality of life and social functioning. Fact 61. The adrenal glands are paired endocrine glands located on the upper poles of the kidneys. They consist of a cortical and a medulla layer, with each zone performing specific functions. The adrenal cortex is divided into 3 zones. The outer zona glomerulosa, which produces mineral corticoids, aldosterone, regulating sodium and potassium balance. The middle zona fasciculata, synthesizing glucocorticoids, cortisol, influencing carbohydrate metabolism, immunity, and stress response. And the inner zona reticularis, producing sex steroids, androgens. The adrenal medulla is composed of modified neurons and synthesizes catecholamines, epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are released into the bloodstream in response to sympathetic stimulation, accelerating heart rate, dilating bronchi, and mobilizing glycogen. Corticosteroid secretion is controlled by negative feedback. The hypothalamus releases corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH, stimulating the pituitary to produce adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, and ACTH stimulates the adrenal cortex. Excess cortisol and aldosterone suppress further CRH and ACTH secretion. Adrenal pathologies range from cortical hyperplasia in Conn syndrome to insufficiency in Addison's disease, where autoimmune destruction of the cortex leads to a deficiency of cortisol and aldosterone, resulting in skin hyperpigmentation, hypotension, and electrolyte imbalances. The adrenal glands are not merely a shield above the kidneys, but a multifunctional endocrine factory responsible for the fight or flight response, fluid and salt balance, and sexual development during puberty. Fact 62nd. The pineal gland, also known as the epiphysis, is a small, cone-shaped organ located in the center of the brain. It weighs approximately 100 milligrams and is responsible for melatonin secretion and the regulation of circadian rhythms. The cells of the epiphysis, called pinealocytes, receive light information via the retinal hypothalamic tract. Light stimuli reach the pineal body through the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus and the dorsal raphe nucleus. As light levels decrease at sunset, the epiphysis increases melatonin production from serotonin through the sequential actions of the enzymes and acetyltransferase and hydroxyindole-O-methyltransferase. Melatonin acts as a potential antioxidant, immunomodulator, and sleep signal, indicating the onset of the night period to the body. It binds to MT1 and MT2 receptors in the hypothalamus and other tissues, regulating sleep phase, sleep intensity, and slow-wave sleep depth. With age, the activity of the epiphysis declines, which can lead to a deterioration in sleep quality in older adults and disruptions in circadian rhythms. In clinical practice, exogenous melatonin and its agonists, such as agomelatine, are used to restore the brain's internal clock when sleep disorders occur. Furthermore, the pineal gland participates in the regulation of several hormonal axes, influencing the reproductive cycle through its interaction with the hypothalamo-pituitary system. Therefore, the epiphysis is not merely a time beacon, but an integrator of light signals and a biochemical conductor of the body's daily rhythms. Fact 63rd. The thyroid gland is a small yet extremely powerful butterfly-shaped organ located on the front of the neck. Despite weighing only about 20 grams, it produces the hormones thyroxine and triiodothyronin, which influence metabolic rate, tissue growth, brain development, and heart function. Follicle cells collect iodine from the blood, bind it to tyrosine, and synthesize precursor hormones. These precursors are then broken down and directed into the bloodstream. The speed of these reactions is regulated by special transporter proteins and the pituitary gland's thyroid-stimulating hormone. An excess of hormones leads to increased heat production, a faster pulse, and accelerated metabolic processes, resulting in hyperthyroidism. A deficiency causes slowed metabolic reactions, a lower body temperature, and symptoms like fatigue, depression, and weight gain. Remarkably, the thyroid itself can adapt. With low iodine intake, it enlarges, forming a goiter to capture more of this essential micronutrient. In autoimmune conditions like thyroiditis, the body's own immune system attacks the follicles, disrupting hormone production. In the 20th century, the practice of radioactive iodine treatment was discovered. This method selectively destroys overactive cells, and the remaining tissue is then supported with medication. Thyroid hormones affect not only the metabolism of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, but also the functioning of the nervous system. They increase receptor sensitivity to neurotransmitters, participate in the myelination of nerve fibers in childhood, and regulate the reflex activity of the spinal cord. A lack of hormones during fetal development leads to congenital cretinism, characterized by severe growth and intellectual disabilities. Thus, the thyroid gland is not just an engine accelerator, but a fine-tuned regulator that coordinates the body's internal rhythm, influencing temperature, weight, mood, and even stress response. Fact 64th. The parathyroid glands are 4 tiny discs, each 2 to 3 millimeters in size, located on the posterior surface of the thyroid gland. They produce parathyroid hormone, the primary regulator of calcium and phosphorus levels in the blood and bones. When blood calcium ion concentration decreases, chemoreceptor cells immediately increase hormone secretion. This hormone stimulates mineral resorption from bones, calcium reabsorption by the kidneys, and the activation of vitamin D from inactive forms in the kidneys. This allows for the rapid restoration of normal ion levels, essential for muscle contraction, blood clotting, and nerve impulse transmission. Overactive parathyroid glands lead to hyperparathyroidism, where excess calcium leaches from bones into the blood, potentially forming kidney stones and causing osteoporosis. Insufficient hormone production, known as hypoparathyroidism, results in bones becoming excessively dense, while muscles and the nervous system suffer from cramps, spasms, and paresthesias. Interestingly, chronic vitamin D deficiency causes parathyroid cell receptors to increase their sensitivity in an attempt to maintain homeostasis, but at the expense of bone. Conversely, excessive use of synthetic vitamin D analogs can suppress parathyroid hormone secretion and increase the risk of hypocalcemia. Parathyroid function exemplifies a perfect feedback loop, where minor fluctuations in biochemical parameters are instantly corrected by a messenger hormone acting at a distance from its secretion source. Fact 65th. Skin mechanoreceptors are specialized structures that enable the sensation of touch, pressure, vibration, and texture. Meissner's corpuscles, located close to the epidermis in the papillary dermis, respond to light touch and low-frequency vibration. Pacinian corpuscles, which are large, concentric, lamellated structures deep within the hypodermis, are highly sensitive to high-frequency oscillations and strong pressure. Merkel's discs, extensions in the basal layer of the epidermis, recognize sustained pressure and object shape, which is important for grip. Ruffini endings, branched terminal extensions in the dermis, register skin stretch and joint position changes. All these corpuscles are connected to the tactile pathways in the spinal cord. Nerve fibers collect signals, directing them to the thalamus and from there to the somatosensory cortex, where a body map is constructed. Beyond sensory functions, the activation of these receptors stimulates the release of neuropeptides that alter the state of blood vessels and skin immune cells. Touch initiates epidermal renewal, reduces inflammation, and lowers cortisol levels. Interestingly, with prolonged exposure to the same vibration, receptors adapt and you stop feeling clothes on your body. But you can regain sensory perception at any moment by changing the stimulus. In individuals deprived of tactile contact, such as in sensory deprivation, emotional state and cognitive functions rapidly deteriorate. Skin mechanoreceptors are not merely sensors, but active participants in homeostasis and emotional regulation. They convey to the brain not only the shape and force of touch, but also its emotional context, pleasure, pain, or anxiety. Fact 66th. The synthesis of vitamin D is a multi-step process. It begins in the skin under the action of ultraviolet radiation type B. The precursor, 7-dehydrocholesterol, located in the epidermal basal layer cells, is converted by the rays into pre-vitamin D3, pre-B-cholecalciferol. This then spontaneously isomerizes into vitamin D3, cholecalciferol. Subsequently, in the liver, it is hydroxylated to 25-hydroxyvitamin D, and in the kidneys to the active form 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D, or calcitriol. Calcitriol binds to cytoplasmic receptors in intestinal cells, enhancing the expression of proteins responsible for transporting calcium and phosphate ions across the mucosa. This, in turn, increases mineral absorption from food. It also acts on bone tissue, stimulating osteoblasts and indirectly osteoclasts, thereby maintaining the balance of remodeling. A deficiency in vitamin D develops with insufficient sunlight or impaired hydroxylation due to liver or kidney diseases. In children, this deficiency manifests as rickets, characterized by delayed ossification and skeletal deformities. In adults, it leads to osteomalacia, involving bone softening and muscle pain. Interestingly, vitamin D also modulates immunity. Calcitriol reduces the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines and strengthens the barrier functions of the respiratory tract epithelium.
Therefore, vitamin D is not just a sun vitamin, but a hormone-like substance connecting the skin, liver, kidneys, bones, and immune system into a single axis for maintaining skeletal health and strength. Fact 67th. The gallbladder is a small, pear-shaped reservoir located beneath the liver. It concentrates and stores up to 70 milliliters of bile, which is produced by hepatocytes. After eating, particularly meals rich in fats, the hormone cholecystokinin released by the eye cells of the duodenum causes the muscular layer of the gallbladder to contract. This action expels the concentrated bile into the common bile duct. Here, bilirubin, cholesterol, and bile salts emulsify fat globules, increasing their surface area. This allows lipases to efficiently break down triglycerides into fatty acids and monoglycerides. Insufficient bile, such as in choledocholithiasis or gallbladder dyskinesia, hinders fat digestion. Undissolved cholesterol can crystallize and form stones, leading to biliary colic and an increased risk of cholecystitis. Interestingly, bile salts in the gallbladder can recirculate more than 20 times before returning to the intestine and then the liver, conserving the body's resources. Thus, this tiny sac functions as a concentrator and dispenser, regulating the fatty stage of digestion and maintaining lipid metabolism homeostasis. Fact 68. Connective tissue, known as fascia, is a continuous three-dimensional network that envelops every muscle, blood vessel, nerve, and organ. It is composed of collagen and elastin fibers, which are integrated into a dense glycoprotein matrix rich in hyaluronic acid and proteoglycans. Fascia not only transmits force from muscles to the skeleton, but also participates in mechanoreception. Fibroblasts and specialized sensory cells located within its layers respond to deformation, stimulating the production of cytokines and growth factors that initiate regeneration after injuries. With chronic overuse, the fascial network thickens, disrupting the sliding of layers and leading to pain, fibrosis, or contractures. Manual therapy techniques, such as myofascial release, aim to restore fibromobility and normalize glycosaminoglycan hydration. Recent research indicates that fascia is connected to the autonomic nervous system and can transmit pain impulses, thereby intensifying muscle spasms throughout the body. Consequently, fascia is not merely a sheath for organs, but an active sensory organ and a regulator of the body's mechanical integrity. Fact 69th. The mesentery, or mesentery, is a recently re-recognized organ that connects the small intestine to the posterior abdominal wall. It consists of two layers of peritoneum, between which blood vessels, lymphatic ducts, and nerves pass. The mesentery fixes the intestinal loops, but possesses sufficient extensibility to allow peristalsis. It participates in immune surveillance. Lymphatic follicles located in the interloopate areas filter lymph and trap pathogens. Mesenteric tissue also secretes adipokines and cytokines, messenger molecules that affect metabolism and inflammation throughout the body. In diseases such as Crohn's disease, mesentery inflammation exacerbates the process, and fat deposits within it, mesenteric fat, serve as a marker of disease severity. Surgeons note that preserving the continuity of the mesentery after intestinal surgery reduces the risk of postoperative adhesions and bowel obstruction. Thus, the mesentery is not merely a suspender of the intestine, but an integrated system for delivery, protection, and inter-organ communication. Fact 70. The peritoneum is a serous membrane that lines the abdominal cavity and covers internal organs. It consists of two layers: the parietal layer, which is attached to the abdominal walls, and the visceral layer, which tightly envelops the organs. Between them lies the peritoneal cavity filled with a few milliliters of lubricating fluid. This fluid, a plasma with added hyaluronate, reduces friction during the movement of internal structures. The peritoneum also performs a barrier function. In case of infection, it rapidly moves macrophages and leukocytes to the site of inflammation, forming fibrinous membranes. These membranes localize the infection and prevent the spread of peritonitis. Furthermore, transperitoneal metabolism occurs through the peritoneum.
During peritoneal dialysis, the metabolic exchange solution is introduced here, allowing for the removal of toxins and excess fluid. Chronic inflammation, known as peritonitis, leads to the formation of adhesions that restrict the mobility of intestinal loops. In gynecology, assessing the peritoneal surface provides information about fertility. The density of the vascular network, as well as the presence of adhesions and scar tissue, affects the patency of the fallopian tubes. Therefore, the peritoneum is not merely a membrane, but a dynamic environment that ensures friction reduction, protection, and metabolism within the abdominal cavity.
Fact 71. Joint fluid, or synovium, is not just a lubricant, but a complex system of cushioning, nourishment, and immune control, enabling the silent movement of our limbs. It is produced by a special layer of cells in the inner lining of the joint capsule, type A and B synoviocytes. Type A functions as a macrophage, engulfing tissue debris and microbes, while type B synthesizes hyaluronate, a long polyuronic acid with a molecular weight of up to 10 million Daltons, responsible for the fluid's viscosity and elasticity. Normally, the hyaluronate concentration ranges from 2 to 4 grams per liter, creating nonlinear rheology. At low loads, the synovium acts like an elastomer, returning energy, and at high loads, like a flowable paste, distributing pressure across the entire joint surface. Several hundred milliliters of this viscous, clear fluid are renewed daily through diffusion across the capsule's vascular network and filtration from blood plasma. It also contains crucial proteins, albumin, hyaluronidase, and lubricants, fragments of glycoproteins that reduce friction at the molecular level. When the balance is disrupted, such as in arthritis, the hyaluronate concentration drops by half, the level of low molecular breakdown products increases, and the joint loses its ability to withstand force and shear stresses. In the 20s of the 21st century, intra-articular biorevitalization techniques emerged, involving the introduction of high molecular hyaluronates, stem cells, or growth factors, to stimulate synoviocytes for regeneration. Studies show that 6 months after 3 injections of a special series, the joint's pulp begins to produce hyaluronate with a molecular weight almost indistinguishable from natural. Thus, synovium is not merely a lubricant, but a living organ that controls movement quality, serves as a nutrient substrate for chondrocytes, and acts as a barrier against inflammation. Without it, any bending or straightening would be like the operation of unlubricated gears, noisy, wearing down interfaces, and leading to pain. Fact 72. Blood type is not just a set of tables for transfusions, but a reflection of a 1,000-year history of adaptation to infection, food, and migrations. The ABO system depends on the presence of oligosaccharide antigens on the surface of red blood cells. A, N-acetylgalactosamine, B, galactose, or their combination AB, as well as the absence of the marker O. These markers are encoded by alleles of the ABO gene on chromosome 9, where an insertion-deletion mutation leads to an inactive enzyme in group O. Additionally, the Rh factor, Rh, is determined by the D protein on the red blood cell membrane. Positive D+ when present, negative D- when absent. The evolution of group O is linked to resistance to malaria and dysentery. Carriers of the O allele have a reduced risk of severe forms of Plasmodium falciparum malaria, while group A correlates with increased susceptibility to cholera. The Rh negative factor varies geographically. In Europe, its proportion reaches 15%, while in Asia and Africa, it barely exceeds 1%. This may reflect selection under epidemic conditions or distant genetic events. In clinical practice, Rh factor incompatibility between a mother, Rh-, and a fetus, Rh+, can cause hemolytic disease of the newborn. With the first Rh-positive child, maternal sensitization is usually unnoticed. But with subsequent pregnancies, her immune system produces IgG antibodies capable of crossing the placental barrier and destroying fetal red blood cells. Modern prevention, the administration of anti-Rh immunoglobulin at 28 weeks and after delivery, has completely eliminated this cause of perinatal mortality. Thus, blood type is not just markers for transfusions, but a key to understanding immunity, migrations, and human interaction with pathogens throughout history.
Fact 73. Genetic mosaicism and chimerism are examples of how a single organism can contain different genetic lines, generated by division errors or embryo fusions. In mosaicism, some cells carry one mutation, while others carry another, due to post-zygotic changes. For instance, in port wine stain, a vascular skin malformation, the activating GNAQ mutation occurs in the early stages of embryogenesis and affects only a portion of vascular cells. This localized change results in a reddish skin tone and a characteristic pattern, but other tissues retain their normal genotype. Chimerism arises when two zygotes fuse into a single early embryo, and the organism develops from the cells of both offspring. In humans, cases of discordant blood transmission have been described during bone marrow transplantation, where the recipient acquires the donor's genetic marker profile. An even more fantastic example includes cases of two-hearted individuals. With complete chimerism, some people carry two sets of blood, which appears in tests as both group O and A simultaneously. Mosaicism can influence the clinical presentation of genetic diseases. In McCune-Albright syndrome, the GNAS mutation in cells directs them to overproduce parathyroid hormone, causing polyostic fibrous dysplasia of the bones, while other cells remain healthy. In oncology, mosaicism explains the emergence of different tumor cell clones with varying sensitivity to chemotherapy. Thus, a single person is not always a genetically uniform monolithic system. Zones with different DNA can be hidden within us, impacting the development, diagnosis, and treatment of a number of diseases.
Fact 74th. Fetal microchimerism is a phenomenon where fetal cells migrate across the placenta and persist for decades in the mother's tissues, creating a living memory of pregnancy. These pluripotent cells find their way into the liver, lungs, skin, even the heart muscle and thyroid gland. Research indicates that in the postpartum maternal heart, fetal stem cells participate in repairing damage after myocardial infarction, differing from the mother cells by HLA alleles. However, microchimerism can play a dual role. On one hand, in conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and systemic sclerosis, the presence of fetal cells is linked to intensified autoimmune reactions, where the mother's immune system mistakenly attacks tissues, perceiving the intruder. On the other hand, several experiments have shown that fetal mesenchymal cells can suppress inflammation by reducing the secretion of pro-inflammatory cytokines TNF-alpha and IL-6, potentially opening new therapeutic avenues. It has been found that these cells can persist in the mother's body for over 40 years after childbirth, demonstrating their capacity for self-maintenance and division. The mechanisms for their retention are unknown, but it is hypothesized that local stem cell niches and regulation through growth factors are involved. Thus, microchimerism is not merely a biological curiosity, but a living link between generations, where the fetus leaves a biological footprint in the mother's body that can participate in regeneration, immune dialogue, and possibly affect health decades later.
Fact 75th. Cerebrospinal fluid is a colorless, transparent substance that circulates within the cranial cavity and the vertebral canal. Its total volume is approximately 150 milliliters. It is produced by ependymal cells in the vascular plexuses of the brain ventricles at a rate of about 500 milliliters per day, with a significant portion returning to the bloodstream via arachnoid granulations. Its consistency resembles diluted plasma with a low protein content, but it maintains a critically important balance of sodium, potassium, and chloride ions. Its primary function is buffering. It maintains constant pressure within the confined cranial space and protects the brain from mechanical oscillations during head movements. With each heartbeat, a pulse pressure wave is transmitted to the brain's vessels and is smoothed out by fluid being pumped into the spinal canal. A secondary, yet equally vital task is the removal of metabolic waste products. Neuronal metabolites such as excess glutamate and surplus potassium are carried away by the CSF flow into the blood, along with traces of neuropeptides and signaling molecules. Impaired circulation of this fluid can lead to hydrocephalus.
If absorption is disrupted or there is a blockage in the ventricular system, the fluid accumulates, increasing intracranial pressure and causing atrophy of cortical structures. In clinical practice, pressure measurement via lumbar puncture and analysis of CSF composition are used to diagnose infections, meningitis, hemorrhages, and demyelinating diseases. Therefore, cerebrospinal fluid is not merely a shock absorber, but a dynamic, homeostatic flow that ensures the nutrition, cleansing, and protection of the central nervous system around the clock.
Fact 76th. The meninges are three sequential layers that enclose the brain and spinal cord: the dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater. The dura mater is a dense fibrous sac with two layers. The outer layer is firmly attached to the inner surface of the skull, while the inner layer forms the dural sinuses, which collect venous blood. The arachnoid mater lies beneath it on elastic trabeculae, with the subdural space containing a thin layer of fluid located between them. The pia mater adheres closely to the brain's surface, following all its convolutions, and together with it forms the subarachnoid space where cerebrospinal fluid circulates. This network of trabeculae not only keeps the brain suspended, but also serves as a pathway for vessels and nerve fibers entering deep structures. In cases of inflammation, meningitis, or hemorrhage, subdural hematoma, the transparency, pressure, and composition of the fluid between the meninges change, which immediately manifests as a headache, neck muscle rigidity, and altered consciousness. In neurosurgery, opening the dura mater, craniotomy, allows access to the pathological focus but requires special technique to avoid damaging the subarachnoid trabeculae and causing air embolism. Thus, the meninges are not merely protective casings, but a triad that provides physical strength, vascular drainage, and transit stations for the circulation of vital fluid in the central nervous system.
Fact 77th. Lymph nodes are small oval filters found throughout the lymphatic system, numbering up to 600 in an adult body. Within these nodes, enclosed by a fibrous capsule and featuring incoming lymphatic vessels, reside immune cells. B lymphocytes in the cortical layer form primary follicles, while T lymphocytes in the paracortical zone provide cellular immunity. Macrophages and dendritic cells patrol the sinuses, engulfing microorganisms and presenting antigens to lymphocytes. As lymph passes through a node, it is cleansed of foreign particles and cells. In the fluorescent sphere of the follicles, B cells undergo cloning and maturation, leading to the production of highly specific antibodies. Activated lymphocytes then exit through efferent vessels and disperse throughout the body, bolstering its defenses. During infection, nodes near the affected area, such as inguinal nodes with a foot wound or cervical nodes with tonsillitis, enlarge and become tender, signaling an active immune response. Conversely, in lymphomas, nodes grow without tissue infiltration and without pain, necessitating a biopsy for an accurate diagnosis. Therefore, lymph nodes are not merely beads in the lymph flow, but are mini training centers, antibody factories, and checkpoints where the distinction between self and non-self is determined daily within the ceaseless stream of lymphatic fluid.
Fact 78th. Neutrophils are the most numerous blood leukocytes, making up 60% of all leukocytes, and are the first responders to inflammation. They are formed in the bone marrow from myeloid precursors, passing through myoblast and promyelocyte stages, after which mature granulocytes enter the bloodstream. Their cytoplasm contains hundreds of granules of two types: azurophilic ones with defensins and myeloperoxide for oxidative bacterial blasting, and specific ones with lysozyme and lactoferrin for bacterial lysis. Upon chemoattractant stimulation, neutrophils accelerate their migration to the site of inflammation through the endothelium into tissues. There, they engulf pathogens via phagocytosis, form a phagosome, and kill them in an oxidative burst using reactive oxygen species. Normally, their lifespan in tissues does not exceed 2 days, after which they die, forming pus. In chronic inflammation, the body can become oversaturated with neutrophils, leading to toxin accumulation and damage to surrounding tissue. Thus, neutrophils are not just the gun of immunity, but a finely tuned biochemical mechanism, from production in the bone marrow to programmed death at the site, where each granule is a warhead with a specific task to save the body. Fact 79th. The vestibular apparatus is a delicate balance instrument, hidden within the temporal bones, yet it controls our sense of spatial orientation. It comprises two sections, a cluster of semicircular canals and two thickened sacs, the utriculus and the sacculus. Each of the three semicircular canals is oriented in its own plane, frontal, sagittal, and horizontal, and is filled with clear endolymph. When the head rotates, the fluid lags behind due to inertia, deforming the elastic cupula, a gel-like cap on sensitive hair cells, and they generate an electrical signal. This signal is transmitted via the vestibular nerve to the brainstem, where it is correlated with information from the eyes and proprioceptors, forming the sensation of rotation or tilt. The utriculus and sacculus contain otolithic membranes, thin plates studded with calcium carbonate crystals, otoliths. During linear acceleration or head tilt, these membranes shift, pressing on the cilia of hair cells and sending a signal to the brain about vertical displacement. This mechanism allows us to keep our gaze fixed on a stationary point during movement, the vestibulo-ocular reflex, and to regulate muscle tone for standing and walking. Inflammation of the vestibular part of the nerve, known as labyrinthitis, causes a person to be thrown sideways, accompanied by nausea and nystagmus. For astronauts in zero gravity, the vestibular apparatus loses its usual gravitational markers, and days are required for adaptation. It was found that in weightlessness, otoliths disperse, and the cupula reacts to any movement as if it were rotation, causing space sickness. Consequently, a system designed for Earth can instantly inform the brain about millimeter changes in body position, and it is to this system that we owe our sense of balance in any posture. Fact 80. Proprioception in muscles and joints is an invisible navigation system that allows us to walk without looking at our feet and pick up small objects without breaking the connection between sight and action. The main receptors are muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs. A muscle spindle is a capsule made of connective tissue outgrowths embedded parallel to muscle fibers. Inside, there are specialized intrafusal fibers with receptor endings. When a muscle stretches, the spindle also stretches, and its sensory endings generate a series of frequent impulses signaling muscle length to the spinal cord. Simultaneously, gamma motor neurons tune the spindle sensitivity by altering the tone of intrafusal fibers. The Golgi tendon organ is located at the junction of a muscle and its tendon and responds to tension. Under high loads, the collagen fibers of the capsule compress the receptor endings, sending an inhibitory signal to the muscle's motor neurons, protecting it from rupture. These two mechanisms work in tandem. Spindles monitor length, and Golgi organs monitor tension. Signals travel via IA and IB afferents to the dorsal horns of the spinal cord, where they directly or through interneurons modulate the activity of alpha motor neurons. It is this automaticity that allows muscles to switch on and off during walking without conscious commands, and a flexor reflex to activate reflexively when encountering an unexpected obstacle. Impaired proprioception, as seen in diabetic neuropathy or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, leads to loose joints, frequent injuries, and a loss of body awareness in space. Thus, not only vision and balance, but also internal sensors deep within muscles and tendons create a continuous map of our position and movement. Fact 81. The heart's conduction system, acting as an autonomous pacemaker and contraction distributor, comprises the sinoatrial node, atrioventricular node, bundle of His, and Purkinje fibers. The sinoatrial node, Keith-Flack node, is a cluster of pacemaker cells on the wall of the right atrium near the entrance of the superior vena cava. Spontaneous depolarization of their membranes occurs due to a leaky ionic current, setting the contraction rate from 60 to 100 beats per minute in adults. The impulse spreads through the atrial myocardium, causing atrial contraction and ventricular filling. The signal then reaches the atrioventricular node, where it is delayed for fractions of a second, ensuring a smooth transition of atrial systole to the ventricles. This delay results from a specialized connective tissue barrier and the slow conduction of AV node cells. Subsequently, the impulse travels down the bundle of His, which divides into the right and left bundle branches descending along the interventricular septum. Their Purkinje fibers, embedding into the ventricular myocardium, spread excitation instantly, ensuring coordinated contraction that ejects blood into the systemic and pulmonary circulations. Malfunctions in the Keith-Flack node lead to sinus arrhythmia, AV node block to bradycardia or complete block, and premature Purkinje fiber contractions to ventricular extrasystole. Modern pacemakers mimic the function of the sinus node, while ablation of pathological foci eliminates atrial fibrillation. Thus, every second of life is regulated by a minute network of conducting cells, operating independently of consciousness but guaranteeing the precision and synchrony of heart mechanics. Fact 82nd. A person's skin is populated by a vast community of microorganisms called the skin microbiome. It includes hundreds of species of bacteria, fungi, and viruses that interact with each other and with our immune system. Different areas of the body, the face, scalp, armpits, palms, and feet, develop their own ecosystems. In oily areas like the forehead and chest, propionobacteria dominate, processing sebum lipids and creating an acidic environment. In moist folds, such as the groin and armpits, corynebacteria and staphylococca are found, participating in odor formation through the metabolism of apocrine secretions. In the moist environment between the toes, yeast-like Malassea predominate, while on the hands, Streptococcus and Acinetobacter are common. Microorganisms form biofilms that act as a barrier against pathogens and help maintain the skin's barrier function by stimulating the production of antimicrobial peptides like defensins and cathelicidins. However, dysbiosis, an imbalance of the microbiome, can lead to dermatitis, acne, psoriasis, and eczema. For instance, patients with atopic dermatitis show reduced bacterial diversity, and Staphylococcus aureus begins to dominate, producing toxins and increasing inflammation. New therapies, such as probiotic and prebiotic creams and the transplantation of healthy microbes, show promise in treating skin diseases by tuning the body's own microflora. Thus, our skin is not sterile covering, but a multi-layered ecosystem shield, where billions of bacterial and fungal communities protect and establish dialogue with host cells. Fact 83rd. The pituitary gland, also known as the hypophysis, is a tiny gland weighing about 1.5 grams, yet it controls all other endocrine organs. It is located in the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone, suspended from the hypothalamus by a thin stalk through which regulatory hormones are supplied. The pituitary gland is divided into an anterior, adenohypophysis, and a posterior lobe, neurohypophysis. The adenohypophysis synthesizes and releases 6 key hormones: somatotropin, growth hormone; prolactin, adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, thyroidtropic hormone, TSH, follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH, and luteinizing hormone, LH. Each is responsible for a separate axis. TSH regulates the thyroid gland, ACTH regulates the adrenal cortex, FSH and LH regulate reproductive processes, somatotropin regulates tissue growth and metabolism, and prolactin regulates lactation and immune functions. The neurohypophysis stores and releases into the blood, when needed, 2 neurohormones produced in the hypothalamic nuclei: vasopressin, which regulates the water-salt balance of the kidneys and blood pressure, and oxytocin, which triggers uterine contractions during childbirth and facilitates breastfeeding. The pituitary gland's mechanism of action is based on the pulsatile release of releasing factors from the hypothalamus, which reach the adenohypophysis via a portal vascular system. Feedback on the levels of 3 key hormones allows for precise adjustment of secretion rates.
Pituitary pathologies, such as adenomas, hypopituitarism, and syndromes of insufficient or excessive secretion, lead to a wide range of disorders in growth, metabolism, reproduction, and hydroelectrolytic balance, making this gland the chief conductor of the body's endocrine symphony.
Fact 84th. The hypothalamus, a region of the diencephalon, is about the size of a small almond but possesses unprecedented regulatory power. It controls body temperature, hunger and satiety, thirst, sleep-wake cycles, stress responses, sexual behavior, and thermoregulation. The hypothalamus contains neurons that synthesize over a dozen neuropeptides. Neuropeptide Y stimulates appetite. Corticotropin-releasing hormone initiates the hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal axis, and somatostatin and dopamine inhibit the secretion of growth hormone and prolactin, respectively. It receives sensory signals from the internal environment, blood temperature, osmolarity, glucose and hormone levels, and external stimuli from the retina and limbic system. Via the pituitary stalk, it regulates the anterior pituitary with minute precision. Each signal from releasing and inhibiting factors modulates the secretion of the 6 anterior pituitary hormones. Concurrently, axonal projections to the posterior pituitary ensure the release of vasopressin and oxytocin. Trauma or tumors of the hypothalamus can lead to thermoregulatory disturbances, uncontrolled appetite or thirst, and disruptions in sleep and behavior. Correcting deficiency syndromes requires hormone replacement therapy and thorough neuroendocrine monitoring. The hypothalamus is a neuroendocrine switchboard where all major pathways for homeostasis and adaptation to environmental changes. Fact 85th. The vegetative or autonomic nervous system is divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic parts. These parts often act antagonistically, but, in balance, maintain internal parameters such as heart rate, vascular tone, breathing, digestion, and thermoregulation. The sympathetic system, originating in the thoracic and lumbar spinal cord segments, is activated during fight-or-flight stress situations. In these instances, norepinephrine and epinephrine increase cardiac output, constrict skin blood vessels, dilate bronchioles, and slow intestinal peristalsis. The parasympathetic system, with its centers in the brainstem, nuclei of the vagus and sacral segments, is responsible for rest and digest processes. Acetylcholine in this system lowers heart rate, stimulates digestive gland secretion, increases vagus nerve tone, and activates intestinal motility. Both branches connect to organs via ganglia, sympathetic nerves through paravertebral chains, and parasympathetic nerves through terminal ganglia near the organs. Imbalances, known as sympatheticonia or vagatonia, can manifest as hypertension, arrhythmias, gastrointestinal disorders, impaired heat balance, and may lead to vegetative vascular dystonia. Correction methods include pharmacological blockade of alpha and beta adrenogenic receptors, modulation of cholinergic activity, and training in breathing practices to activate the vagus nerve. The autonomic nervous system is an invisible regulatory range that keeps the internal environment in dynamic equilibrium, instantly responding to any challenge. Fact 86th. Skeletal muscle fibers are divided into 3 main types, each responsible for specific functions: slow oxidative, type 1, fast oxidative glycolytic, type 2A, and fast glycolytic, type 2B. Type 1 fibers are rich in mitochondria and myoglobin, well supplied with blood, utilize aerobic metabolism, and are resistant to fatigue, forming the basis for postural activity and endurance. Type 2A fibers contain a moderate amount of mitochondria, can operate in both aerobic and anaerobic modes, providing intermediate contraction speed and endurance. The most explosive are type 2B fibers. They have few mitochondria and capillaries, and anaerobic glycolysis yields a rapid but short-lived burst of strength, followed by lactate accumulation and quick fatigue. The ratio of these fiber types in each person is determined by genetics, but training can shift these boundaries. Endurance exercises increase the proportion of oxidative fibers, while sprinting exercises favor glycolytic fibers. Within each muscle, all fibers innervated by a single motor neuron are of the same type, forming motor units of different quality.
They are recruited sequentially. At low loads, small motor units with type 1 fibers are activated. As effort increases, larger units of type 2A and 2B are engaged. This recruitment principle ensures a smooth gradient of force and optimal energy expenditure. Understanding muscle fiber types is fundamental for sports training, post-injury rehabilitation, and treating muscle weakness.
Fact 87th. Hemopoiesis, the process of continuous blood cell renewal, occurs in the red bone marrow, primarily in flat bones such as the sternum, pelvis, ribs, and skull. The entire blood volume of a human, approximately 5 liters, is completely renewed on average every 70 days. Red blood cells live for 120 days, platelets for 7 to 10 days, and white blood cells for several hours to several days. It all begins with stem cells, true progenitors capable of both self-renewal and differentiation. The activation of a particular pathway is determined by a combination of cytokines and hormones. Erythropoietin from the kidneys stimulates red blood cell formation. Thrombopoietin from the liver stimulates platelet formation, and interleukins and colony-stimulating factor stimulate white blood cell formation. At each stage, cells undergo rigorous selection. Apoptosis filters out defective or overactive cells, while correct ones are sent into the bloodstream. In case of blood loss, erythropoietin levels instantly rise, and the bone marrow doubles red blood cell production. During infections, the system retrains its priority to white blood cells. Understanding the molecular mechanisms of hemopoiesis has enabled the development of bone marrow transplantation for leukemias and the use of stimulating factors in vitro, saving the lives of tens of thousands of patients annually. Fact 88th. The brain's metabolism operates on the principle of an energy atom. Each gram of brain tissue consumes approximately 5 milliliters of oxygen per minute. The entire central nervous system accounts for nearly 20% of all oxygen and glucose supplied to the body. Neurons do not store glycogen, making them dependent on a constant blood flow. A reduction of even 10% leads to cognitive impairments within seconds. Blood flows about twice as slowly in brain capillaries compared to other tissues, ensuring more complete gas exchange saturation. Astrocytes surround neurons with a lateral cuff, absorbing excess glutamate and potassium ions, processing them, and providing lactate to neurons as an alternative fuel during high activity. Microglia patrol the intercellular space, engulfing small fragments and maintaining homeostasis. The balance of the brain's homeostatic processes relies on the barrier properties of the endothelium, the blood-brain barrier, the function of the glymphatic system, and the fine-tuning of neuromodulators, acetylcholine, dopamine, GABA, and serotonin. Metabolic disturbances, such as vascular diseases, hypoglycemia, and hypoxia, trigger inflammatory cascades that can lead to neurodegeneration. The study of brain metabolism initiated stroke therapy, where recanalization of a vessel and restoration of blood flow within the first few hours can recover up to 50% of lost functions. Fact 89th. Human thermoregulation is a complex balance between heat production and heat loss. When the temperature drops, the central thermoregulator in the hypothalamus activates two mechanisms: vasoconstriction of the skin and shivering. Shivering is an involuntary rhythmic muscle contraction that can double heat production. When the temperature rises, sweating and vasodilation of the skin are activated to enhance heat dissipation through evaporation and convection. The effectiveness of sweating depends on the density of eccrine glands, which can number up to 5 million across the entire body, and on air humidity. In trained individuals, sweat begins to be released faster and more evenly, which protects against overheating during exertion. There is also a central effect. Substances like pyrogens act on receptors in the hypothalamus, raising the body's set point temperature, which manifests as fever during infections. Cold and heat acclimatization alter the threshold for activating thermoregulation reactions. With regular exposure to cold, shivering starts at lower temperatures, and in heat, sweating is activated earlier.
Impaired thermoregulation, occurring with hypothyroidism, diabetes, or damage to vegetative centers, leads to serious risks of heat stroke or hypothermia. Therefore, over millions of years of evolution, humans have managed to develop one of the most versatile and flexible defense mechanisms.
Fact 90. The skin's sensory systems are not limited to mechanoreceptors. Thermoreceptors and nociceptors form separate networks. Thin, unmyelinated C fibers transmit pain and temperature at speeds up to 1 meter per second, while faster, myelinated A-delta fibers convey sharp, pricking pain at speeds up to 20 meters per second. Cold, TRPM8, and heat, TRPV1, ion channel receptors open with temperature changes of just a few degrees, allowing perception of a range from 4 to 48 degrees Celsius. Nociceptors, which are free nerve endings, respond to mechanical, thermal, and chemical stimuli. Upon tissue damage, they are activated by substances released from cells, such as prostaglandins, serotonin, and bradykinin, and send signals to the spinal cord from where they are directed to the thalamus and sensory cortex. Here, not only is the sensation of pain formed, but anti-nociceptive systems are also activated: endorphins, enkephalins, and neuropeptide Y. These internal opiates reduce the conduction of pain signals at the level of subcortical structures and the reticular formation, allowing the body to balance between a protective reaction and the preservation of the damaged area's functionality. Thus, the skin is not only a barrier, but also a complex, multi-level sensory and self-regulation organ, instantly informing the brain of any danger and initiating protective mechanisms.
Fact 91. The synapse is fundamental to neural communication, serving as a narrow gap between the axon terminal of one neuron and the dendrite of another. Within the presynaptic terminal are vesicles filled with neurotransmitters, messenger molecules like glutamate, gamma-aminobutyric acid, GABA, dopamine, serotonin, and acetylcholine. When an electrical impulse reaches the axon, calcium channels open, allowing calcium ions to enter. This prompts vesicles to move towards the membrane and release their contents into the synaptic cleft. The released molecules diffuse across the 15 to 20 nanometer space and bind to specific receptors on the postsynaptic membrane, either opening or closing ion channels, thereby exciting or inhibiting the next neuron. After their function, neurotransmitters are cleared from the cleft in three ways: reuptake by transporters into the presynapse, breakdown by enzymes such as acetylcholinesterase, and diffusion into surrounding tissues. A distinct category, peptide neurotransmitters, have a longer-lasting effect and can modulate local networks by altering synapse sensitivity. Synaptic plasticity, the ability to change signal transmission strength based on activation frequency and patterns, underlies learning and memory. Long-term potentiation, LTP, and long-term depression, LTD, are regulated by protein kinases and calcium-dependent pathways, leading to changes in receptor numbers and the structure of dendritic spines.
Fact 92. The central nervous system is surrounded by a unique space, the ependymal complex of ventricular channels, through which cerebrospinal fluid circulates. In the lateral, third, and fourth ventricles, choroid plexuses lined with ependymal cells produce CSF, while cisterns and channel transitions regulate its flow. The primary water electrolyte exchange between blood and CSF is ensured by osmoreceptors and the fine regulation of the sodium ion pump in the ependyma. Excessive production or blockage of fluid passage leads to internal hydrocephalus, where pressure within the ventricles increases, causing their cavities to expand and compressing cortical structures, resulting in the development of cognitive and motor impairments. Treatment involves the implantation of a shunt that diverts fluid into the abdominal cavity. In the pathophysiology of some demyelinating and neurodegenerative diseases, changes in CSF composition have been noted. Elevated levels of protein, immune complexes, and oligoclonal bands indicate autoimmune processes and are actively used in the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. Fact 93rd. Pulmonary circulation is the only pathway where arterial pressure is low and vascular resistance is minimal, optimizing gas exchange in the lungs. The right ventricle of the heart pumps venous blood into the pulmonary artery, which divides into two main branches, then into segmental arteries, arterioles, and capillaries that surround the alveoli. Here, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood is higher than in the alveolar air, causing it to diffuse out, while oxygen from the air enters the red blood cell, binding to the heme of hemoglobin. Due to the logarithmic nature of the oxygen dissociation curve, red blood cell saturation reaches 99% at normal alveolar PO2. After saturation, blood returns via the pulmonary veins to the left atrium, supplying the arterial system with oxygen. In cardiopulmonary pathologies, such as pulmonary hypertension or embolism, increased resistance causes right ventricular failure, edema, and tissue hypoxia. Fact 94th. The wall of an artery is composed of three layers: the intima, the media, and the adventitia. The intima, the innermost layer, is formed by endothelial cells. These cells produce nitric oxide and prostacyclins, which regulate the tone of smooth muscle cells and prevent clot formation. The media, the middle layer, contains smooth muscle cells and elastic fibers. These provide elasticity and the ability for vasoconstriction and vasodilation, controlled by the autonomic nervous system and hormones. The adventitia, the outermost layer, consists of collagen fibers. It contains nerve fibers and the vessels of the adventitial network, vasa vasorum, which nourish the artery wall itself. In atherosclerosis, lipids and inflammatory cells penetrate the intima, forming plaques that narrow the lumen and provoke thrombosis. In response, the media may thicken, compensating for increased pressure. Modern treatment methods include stenting, targeted plaque destruction with ultrasound, and drug therapy with statins, which stabilize plaques and reduce the risk of heart attack and stroke. Fact 95th. Telomeres, which are protective caps on the ends of chromosomes, play a key role in cell aging and regeneration. Each DNA division cycle cannot fully copy the terminal sections, and without correction, chromosomes would shorten, leading to the loss of genetic information. The enzyme telomerase, which includes reverse transcriptase and an RNA template, adds the terminal tandem repeats T-tag GG in humans. Telomerase activity is high in embryonic and stem cells, ensuring their long lifespan and ability to divide. With age, telomerase is switched off in most somatic cells. Telomeres shorten by 200 to 300 nucleotides per cycle, and when telomere length falls below a critical point, a cascade of senescence or apoptosis is triggered. This genetic safeguard protects against uncontrolled division, oncogenesis, but limits the regenerative potential of tissues. Reactivation of telomerase, or an alternative mechanism for lengthening terminal sections, is found in cancer cells, allowing for infinite proliferation. Experiments modulating telomerase in mice have shown a 10 to 15% increase in lifespan, but the risk of oncogenesis also rises. Thus, the balance between aging and cancer relies on the finest control of telomere length, the cellular clockwork. Fact 96. Autophagy, or cellular self-eating, is a critical mechanism for cleaning and adapting to stress. When nutrients are scarce or organelles are damaged, the mTOR signaling pathway is activated. Its suppression initiates the formation of a phagosome, a double-membrane vesicle that engulfs defective mitochondria, excess protein aggregates, or pathogenic bacteria. The phagosome fuses with a lysosome, forming an autophagolysosome, within which hydrolytic enzymes break down the contents into amino acids, lipids, and carbohydrates. These metabolites return to the cytoplasm and serve as fuel and building material. Autophagy is involved in maintaining the homeostasis of neurons, blood cells, and liver tissues by removing old organelles and preventing the accumulation of toxic aggregates. A lack of autophagy is linked to Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and obesity. Its overactivation can lead to cell death during ischemia. In a mouse model, activating autophagy through dietary restriction or pharmacologically with rapamycin extended lifespan by 15 to 20% and protected against age-related changes. This suggests that a cell is not merely a passive warehouse, but a dynamic workshop for self-recycling, where autophagy is the main switch for quality and energy supply during difficult times. Fact 97th. The hemostasis system integrates vascular response, platelet aggregation, and the coagulation cascade to instantly stop bleeding. Upon endothelial damage, thromboxane A2 and thromboglobulin are released, and collagen becomes exposed. Platelets then adhere to this subendothelium via von Willebrand factor, change shape, and release adenosine diphosphate, serotonin, and thromboxane, enhancing aggregation. Concurrently, the clotting cascade is activated. With a thrombin tramway, antigen tran, and factor 12 present, factors 11, 9, and 8 are sequentially activated. The formed IXA8A complex with factor X creates a proconvertase. In the foliate stream, the proconvertase converts factor X to XA. Together with factor V, it forms prothrombinase, which catalyzes the formation of thrombin from proconvertin. Thrombin, besides converting fibrinogen to fibrin, also activates factor 13, stabilizing the fibrin-fiber network and enhances positive feedback by activating factors V and 8. This chemical cathedral rapidly transforms liquid plasma into a gel, filling the wound. Subsequent macrophages and fibroblasts then restore the tissue. Deficiencies at any level, hemophilia A with factor 8 deficiency, B with factor I deficiency, or thrombin deficiency lead to spontaneous bleeding. Excessive activation results in thrombosis, strokes, and heart attacks. Hemostasis is not merely a response to injury, but a precise biochemical symphony where every note must be played at the right moment. Fact 98th. The neurosecretion of the hypothalamus and adenohypophysis forms a single axis, the hypothalamic pituitary stalk. Neurons in the suprachiasmatic and paraventricular nuclei produce releasing factors. These factors reach the adenohypophysis via the pituitary's portal vascular system. In the adenohypophysis, releasing hormones specifically stimulate or inhibit the synthesis of tropic hormones, ACTH, TSH, FSH, LH, somatotropin, prolactin. Effector hormones from the adenohypophysis then act on peripheral endocrine organs through the bloodstream. This bridge of neurons and vessels creates secretion pulsation. For instance, ACTH pulses once per hour, and TSH pulses twice per day, ensuring flexible adaptation to seasonal, daily, and stress-related changes. In nervous diseases, damage to this system leads to neuroendocrine syndromes. For example, adenohypophyseal tumors increase prolactin levels, causing galactorrhea amenorrhea, while hypothalamic lesions cause diabetes insipidus due to inappropriate vasopressin removal. Thus, neurosecretion is not just hormone delivery, but a complex rhythm generator where exchange signals and high-priority commands are connected by a single venous pathway. Fact 99. The liver serves as the body's central biochemical laboratory, responsible for detoxifying numerous compounds through the cytochrome P450 system. This multi-enzyme complex, comprising over 40 isoforms, specializes in transforming specific substances like medications, hormones, and xenobiotics. In the first phase of biotransformation, P450 enzymes oxidize substrates by introducing a polar group, such as a hydroxyl, carboxyl, or amino group, into the molecule. Subsequently, in the second phase, the polarized metabolite is conjugated with glucuronic acid, sulfate, or glutathione by corresponding transferases, rendering it water-soluble and facilitating its easy elimination via bile or urine. The activity of a specific CYP isoform is influenced by genetic polymorphism. In some individuals, CYP2D6 catalyzes up to 80% of all metabolic transformations, while in others, its functions may be partially or completely lost due to allele deletion, impacting the pharmacokinetics of antidepressants, beta blockers, and opioids. Beyond genetics, P450 expression is regulated by inflammatory cytokines, e.g. interleukin-6 reduces the activity of most CYPs, hormones, glucocorticoids enhance CYP3A4, and dietary components, grapefruit juice inhibits CYP3A4 in the intestinal wall. In cases of poisoning or drug overdose, the liver can induce a significant increase in the rough endoplasmic reticulum where P450 isoforms are located, thereby enhancing detoxification capacity. However, chronic exposure can lead to induced hepatotoxicity, characterized by the formation of reactive intermediates that bind to hepatocyte proteins, triggering oxidative stress and apoptosis. Conversely, P450 inhibitors like ketoconazole or erythromycin can cause drug accumulation and toxic reactions. Therefore, the cytochrome P450 system in liver cells is not merely a liver detoxification station, but a precise complex that balances the safe elimination of foreign substances with the risk of reactive metabolite formation. And the efficacy and safety of drug therapy largely depend on its function.
The endocannabinoid system is a universal regulator of homeostasis. It operates through endogenous cannabinoids, anandamide, 2-arachidonoyl glycerol, CB1 and CB2 receptors, and synthesis and degradation enzymes. CB1 receptors are concentrated in the brain, specifically in the hippocampus, basal ganglia, and cortex, regulating memory, mood, pain sensitivity, and motor coordination. CB2 receptors are primarily located in immune system cells and are involved in modulating inflammation and immune responses. Anandamide is synthesized in the postsynaptic membrane from phosphatidylinositol by N-acylphosphatidylethanolamin hydrolyzing enzyme. It is released into the synaptic cleft and acts retrogradely, binding to CB1 receptors on the presynaptic membrane. This reduces the release of excitatory neurotransmitters, glutamate, or inhibitory ones, GABA, thereby modulating neuronal excitability and plasticity. 2-arachidonoyl glycerol is formed from phosphatidylinositol via phospholipase C and diacylglycerol lipase. It acts similarly to anandamide but has a longer duration of action and is more resistant to hydrolysis by monoacylglycerol lipase. Anandamide is rapidly degraded by fatty acid amide hydrolase, ensuring precise temporal regulation of signaling. The endocannabinoid system also regulates appetite by influencing the hypothalamus. CB1 activation in the hypothalamus stimulates hunger and reduces energy expenditure. Blocking these receptors, as seen in experiments with rimonabant, led to weight loss due to reduced caloric intake. In the brain, the system is also involved in reward mechanisms and pain threshold regulation. Endocannabinoids reduce pain perception and promote positive affect. Thus, the endocannabinoid system acts as a flexible sensor and corrector of numerous physiological processes, from immune response to cognitive functions, maintaining a fine balance between excitability and protection, hunger and satiety, pain and comfort. Its dysfunction is associated with neurological, psychiatric, and metabolic disorders. Modulation of CB1 and CB2 receptors offers pathways to new therapies for a wide range of diseases.